Welcome back to another story on Fiction Blue. This time, we're bringing you, what if Harry found a secret vault key in the Dursleys' mail and successfully withdrew his inheritance without Dumbledore knowing? Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Key. The Morning Post at number 4, Privet Drive arrived at precisely 7:30, the same way it always did, with the snap of the letterbox, the soft slap of envelopes against linoleum, and Vernon Dudley thundering down the stairs before anyone else could breathe near it. Harry was already awake. He'd been awake since 5, lying on the narrow mattress in his too-small bedroom, staring at the ceiling and listening to the neighborhood assemble itself into another perfectly ordinary Tuesday. Lawn mowers. A distant dog. Mrs. Fig's cat yowling at something in the hedge 2 doors down. The Dursleys' house had its own rhythm, and Harry had memorized every beat of it the way a prisoner memorizes the schedule of the guards. He wasn't supposed to come downstairs until he was called. That was the rule for summer. He sat on the edge of his mattress in Dudley's old pajamas, 3 sizes too large, the waistband rolled 4 times, and listened to Vernon's breakfast ritual begin. The kettle. The sizzle of bacon. Petunia's slippers on the kitchen tile. Dudley's feet hitting the floor above like a minor geological event. Hedwig was asleep in her cage, her head tucked under one wing. Harry had sent her out the night before with a brief, careful letter to Ron. "I'm fine, bit bored, hope the gnoming went well," the kind of letter that said nothing because he knew by now that Dumbledore's people read his mail. Not officially. Not with any announcement. It had taken Harry most of first year to notice the faint smell of someone else's magic clinging to opened envelopes, the way certain responses arrived slightly delayed, as though they'd stopped somewhere along the route. He noticed things like that now. He hadn't always. Downstairs, the letterbox snapped. Harry heard Vernon's chair scrape. Heard the deliberate footsteps into the hallway. Heard the familiar rustle of sorting, bills in one hand, catalogs in the other, anything remotely unusual going straight into the bin without examination. Vernon had a sixth sense for the unusual, honed by years of enthusiastic denial. Then he heard something he didn't expect. A pause. Vernon didn't pause. Vernon sorted mail the way he did everything else, with blunt, efficient certainty. But there was a gap in the sound, a held breath, and then something that might have been the beginning of a word that Vernon swallowed before it got out. Then the heavy footsteps moved into the kitchen, and the morning resumed as though nothing had happened. Harry waited 4 minutes. He'd learned patience from the Dursleys, which was probably the only useful thing they'd ever taught him. At exactly 4 minutes, he opened his bedroom door with the careful turn of the handle that prevented the squeak, moved down the hallway in the path closest to the wall where the floorboards didn't creak, and paused at the top of the stairs. Vernon was reading something at the kitchen table. His neck had gone the color of a rare steak. Petunia stood at the counter with her back very deliberately turned, stirring tea with more focus than any cup of tea in history had ever required. Harry came down the stairs the loud way, letting each step announce him, and pushed open the kitchen door. "Morning," he said. "Sit down," Vernon said, without looking up. "Eat." A plate had been left at the corner of the table, furthest from everyone else. 2 pieces of toast, no butter. Harry sat down and picked up a piece and ate it, watching Vernon over the rim of his own barely touched cup. There was something on the table. Not the usual spread of bills and flyers. A single envelope, thick cream-colored paper, sitting apart from the rest of the pile with the deliberate isolation of something Vernon had moved there and then not quite managed to decide what to do with. The address on the front was written in gold ink. Harry's hand stopped halfway to his second piece of toast. He could only see part of it from where he was sitting. Mr. H. Potter was visible, and below that, in script too precise to be anything other than magical, the second bedroom, for Privet Drive, and that alone told him something, because it was the first piece of correspondence he'd ever received that acknowledged where he actually slept, rather than the cupboard under the stairs where he'd spent the first 10 years of his life. But it wasn't a Hogwarts letter. The parchment was too heavy for that, the ink too gold, and there was a seal on the back that even from 6 feet away Harry recognized as not being the Hogwarts crest. It was Gringotts. "That's mine," Harry said. Vernon looked up. His face performed several emotions in quick succession: bluster, calculation, something that flicked briefly toward shame before disappearing entirely. "Now see here, it has my name on it." Harry stood up, crossed the kitchen, and picked up the envelope from the table in one smooth motion. Vernon started to rise from his chair. "You'll leave that, you've been confiscating my mail." Harry said it flat, not as an accusation, just as a statement of fact he was confirming aloud. "For years. All of it, anything that comes for me." He looked at Vernon steadily. "Dumbledore's letters. Ron's letters. All of it. We do no such thing, the Hogwarts letters. Before first year." Harry tilted his head slightly. "Those came every day. Dozens of them. I know that now. How many of mine did you throw away before that?" Vernon's face had gone through red and was pushing toward a color that didn't have a good name. Petunia had stopped stirring. Harry looked at the envelope. Turned it over. The Gringotts seal, 2 crossed golden keys above a mountain, was pressed deep into the wax, and it was unbroken. Vernon hadn't been able to open it. Which meant either the seal was magically protected or Vernon had, on some level, not been quite willing to cross that particular line. Harry tucked the envelope under his arm. "I'm going upstairs," he said. "Thank you for breakfast." He walked out of the kitchen before Vernon could assemble enough outrage to form a sentence. Up in his room with the door closed and a chair wedged under the handle, a habit he'd developed after Dudley had learned to pick the lock with a bent paperclip, Harry sat on the floor with his back against the bed and held the envelope up to the morning light coming through the window. Hedwig had woken up when he came in. She was watching him with one large amber eye, the other still half closed, with the expression of an owl who considered 7 a.m. to be deeply unreasonable. The seal didn't resist when Harry broke it. No sparks, no flash, no magical alarm. Whatever protection had prevented Vernon from opening it was apparently content to let Harry have a go. Inside was a single card, heavy cream paper, and a key. The card read, "Dear Mr. Potter, Gringotts Bank of Diagon Alley wishes to inform you that the secondary access key to Vault 687, registered to the estate of James Charles Potter and Lily Euphemia Potter, has been forwarded to you at the request of Standing Vault Instruction 7, triggered upon the account holder's 12th year. Per the terms of the Potter Family Trust, you are hereby entitled to full independent access to Vault 687 and its contents, including the estate registry, the family archive, and all associated properties held in the Potter estate. We note that a primary guardian of record has been managing this account under a temporary custodianship arrangement since November 1981. Per standard Gringotts protocol, custodianship terminates automatically upon the heir's 12th year unless renewed by written consent of the heir. No such consent has been filed. You are invited to visit at your earliest convenience. Griphook, Senior Teller, Potter Account Gringotts Wizarding Bank. Harry read it twice. Then a third time, slower. The key was small, lighter than his vault key from first year, with a more complex bit, 3 interlocking teeth at the tip, a small emerald set into the bow. He turned it over in his fingers. The metal was warm. Not warm like it had been sitting in an envelope, but warm like something that recognized his hand. Vault 687. His vault, the one Hagrid had taken him to last year, the one stuffed with gold coins, that was Vault 687. His account. His inheritance. And it said secondary access key, which meant there was a primary one. And the primary had been used. A primary guardian of record. Harry sat very still for a moment, listening to the house around him. Dudley had gone out. Vernon was on the phone in the study, voice low and placating in the way that meant he was talking to someone at work. Petunia was in the garden. He picked up a blank piece of parchment from his desk and wrote a very short letter. Not to Ron. Not to Hermione. To Gringotts. Dear Griphook, or whoever handles the Potter account, I received the key and the card. I would like to visit as soon as possible. Please advise how I might do so without drawing undue attention from parties who may be monitoring my movements. Harry Potter. He paused, then added P.S. What exactly is a primary guardian of record, and how does one become one without the heir's knowledge? He tied it to Hedwig's leg. She regarded him with an expression that suggested she found the whole enterprise mildly beneath her dignity but would, under the circumstances, condescend to be useful. Quick as you can, he told her. And don't let anyone intercept you. She nipped his finger, not hard, and was gone through the window in a white rush. The response came back in 3 hours, which was either a testament to Hedwig's speed or the fact that Gringotts had a very efficient owl post operation. The reply wasn't from Griphook. It was from someone called Sharprock, and the handwriting had the quality of someone who did not waste ink. Mr. Potter, your inquiry has been escalated to this office. Gringotts takes matters of improper account management with the utmost gravity. We are prepared to receive you at any hour. As to your query regarding undue attention, Gringotts maintains a secure flow connection accessible from the leaky cauldron that bypasses the main public entrance. Ask Tom the barman to direct you to the private fireplace. State, Gringotts secure, and you will arrive in the private client foyer. No appointment required for the Potter estate. As to your second query, a primary guardian of record is appointed when an heir is underage and cannot manage their own account. The appointment requires documentation, a magical contract, and the heir's blood-signed agreement, or in exceptional circumstances, a Wisingamot order. We have the documentation on file. We have the contract on file. We do not have your blood signature. Sharprock Senior Account Manager, Estates Division. Harry read that last line 4 times. We do not have your blood signature. He folded the letter and put it in his pillowcase, along with the key and the card. He sat on the edge of his bed and looked out the window at the perfectly ordinary street, at Mrs. Figg walking her cat on a lead, at the Dursleys' car sitting in the drive with its freshly waxed bonnet reflecting the summer sky. Someone had signed for him. Someone had presented documentation and a contract and had said, in effect, I will manage the Potter accounts, and had not needed Harry's signature to do it. Which meant either the magical contract had been forged, or the Wisingamot had issued an order, or there was a third option that Harry wasn't seeing yet. He needed to get to Gringotts. And he needed to do it without Dumbledore knowing. The question was how. He was 12 years old, living in a Muggle suburb, with no car, no flow connection in the house, and, he was reasonably certain, at least one member of Dumbledore's network watching Privet Drive at any given time. Arabella Figg had been placed here deliberately. He'd worked that out sometime in June, watching the way she angled her garden chair to face the Dursley house. She was watching over him, he thought, which was almost touching except for the part where she'd never told him. He couldn't use the night bus. Too visible, too loud, and it stopped directly in front of wherever you were standing, which would be a dead giveaway on a residential street. But the Dursleys had a car. And Vernon had taught Dudley to drive in the Sainsbury's car park last summer. Harry thought about that for a moment, then discarded it, because no power on earth was getting him in a car with Dudley. But there was another option. A Muggle option, completely invisible to magical surveillance. The train. He had enough Muggle money, Dudley's cast-off birthday money that had rolled under the bed and been forgotten, about £11 in assorted coins, to get to London from Little Whinging. The train stopped at Little Whinging Station, 4 streets over, at 9:30 every morning. The Leaky Cauldron was in London. From the Leaky Cauldron, he could use the secure flow. Nobody was watching for a 12-year-old with messy hair buying a train ticket with coins from his pocket. Nobody would. Because Dumbledore didn't think in Muggle. That, Harry reflected, might be the most useful thing he'd learned about the wizarding world so far. He spent the rest of the day being almost aggressively normal. He came down for lunch when called. He did the washing up without being asked, partly to avoid suspicion and partly because Petunia's expression when she didn't have to ask was almost worth the effort. He watched television with Dudley for 40 minutes and lost a pretend argument about which channel to watch. That evening, he packed a small bag. Not his school trunk, that was too obvious, too large, impossible to explain. Just his backpack, the one Petunia had bought for school and never reclaimed. Into it went, the key, Sharprock's letter, his Gringotts statement from first year, found folded in the back of a textbook, a change of clothes, his wand in the inside pocket where it wouldn't be seen, and £8.70 in coins. He set his alarm for 7:30, early enough to be out before Petunia started her kitchen routine, late enough that the station would be open. He slept better than he had in weeks. The morning was grey and warm, the kind of English summer morning that can't decide between proper weather and an approximation of it. Harry came downstairs at 7:40 to find the house empty. Vernon's car was gone, which meant an early meeting, and Petunia's note on the kitchen table said she'd taken Dudley to his friend Pierre's house for the day. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, note in hand, and felt something loosen in his chest. He hadn't planned for it to be this easy. He'd been prepared to slip out unnoticed through the back garden, to have a story ready, to brazen it out if necessary. Instead the house was just empty. He left a note of his own, under Petunia's, gone to the library. Back by tea. And walked out the front door. The morning smelled like cut grass and the distant suggestion of rain. Mrs. Figg's house was quiet. Harry walked at a normal pace down Privet Drive, turned left at the corner, turned left again onto Magnolia Crescent, and kept going. He didn't look behind him. Looking behind you was a signal. Instead he counted his footsteps, kept his head up, and in 8 minutes walked through the doors of Little Whinging Station. The man at the ticket window had a newspaper and a look of absolute professional indifference that Harry found deeply reassuring. London Paddington, please. Single. Platform 2. 8:52 train. That'll be £4.90. Harry counted out the coins. The man gave him a ticket. Harry found a seat on the platform bench with a clear view of both ends, and sat with his backpack on his knee and watched the morning traffic on the road beyond the station fence. Nobody followed. Nobody came. A woman with a push-chair sat 3 benches down. 2 men in work clothes were talking about football. The 8:52 arrived exactly on time, and Harry got on it and found a window seat in an empty carriage and watched Little Whinging slide away behind him. He was on his own. Actually, genuinely on his own, no Hagrid beside him, no trolley to navigate, no magic money to confuse, no one telling him where to go and what to touch and what to notice. He looked out the window at the backs of houses, the gardens, the arterial roads choked with morning commuters, and felt the peculiar lightness of being nobody's concern for once. It lasted exactly as long as the train ride, which was fine. He'd take it. London swallowed him whole the moment he stepped out of Paddington, which was also fine. He'd been to London twice before, once in the Dursleys' car, barely remembered, and once on the Hogwarts Express, too excited and overwhelmed to look properly. Now he stood on Praed Street in the grey morning with his backpack over one shoulder and looked at the map on the wall of the station entrance like someone who absolutely knew what they were doing. He found the Underground, bought a ticket with his remaining money, and took the Baccaloo line to Charing Cross. The Leaky Cauldron was easy enough to find when you knew it was there. The trick was that Muggles didn't register it, their eyes slid past it the way eyes slide past something deeply boring, and Harry had spent enough time in the wizarding world now that he'd had to learn to not do that, to deliberately focus on the old pub wedged between the record shop and the bookstore on Charing Cross Road. Tom was behind the bar when Harry pushed the door open, polishing a glass with the expression of a man who had never once polished that glass clean. The pub was mostly empty this early, 2 old wizards in the corner with breakfast, and a woman reading the Daily Prophet with the focused intensity of someone who was actually absorbing the information rather than just staring at the moving photographs. "Morning," Harry said, sitting on a bar stool. "Could you point me to the private fireplace?" Tom squinted at him. "You'd be needing a specific connection for that. Private access only." "Gringotts secure," Harry said quietly. Tom looked at him for a moment longer, the glass still in his hand, and then something shifted in his expression, recognition, Harry thought, and possibly the beginning of deference. Tom the barman knew who he was. Every witch and wizard in Britain knew who he was. "Through the back," Tom said. "Past the kitchen door, there's a short hall. Blue door on the left." The private fireplace was in a small, clean room, no grime, no smoke stains, just a proper mantel and a brass pot of flow powder on the shelf. Harry took a pinch of it, the same vivid green he remembered from the disastrous trip to Knockturn Alley in his head, and threw it in. "Gringotts secure," he said, and stepped forward. The green flame rushed up around him, and the leaky cauldron disappeared. The private client foyer of Gringotts was nothing like the main entrance. There were no long queues of wizards with trolleys, no goblins processing transactions at the speed of organized contempt, no chandeliers and marble floors visible from 30 meters. This was a smaller room, still marble, still polished, still carrying the faint chill of a space that never quite managed to feel welcoming, but quieter, with individual chairs and a single goblin at a desk who looked up from his work with an expression of professional evaluation. "Name," the goblin said. "Harry Potter." The goblin's expression didn't change. He made a note in a ledger. "One moment." He was gone through a side door before Harry had fully settled into one of the chairs. The room was quiet. A clock ticked on the wall. Harry looked around at the artwork, not portraits, just geometric patterns in gold and silver that seemed to shift slightly when you weren't looking directly at them, and waited. The goblin returned in under 2 minutes. "Sharprock will see you now." He was led down a corridor that sloped gradually downward, the walls becoming rougher as they went, the gold fixtures giving way to bare stone. Not the intimidating descent of the main cart system, this was a gentler slope, a walking corridor lit by lanterns that burned steadily without flame. They passed several closed doors, each marked with a symbol Harry didn't recognize, and stopped at one near the end of the hall. The goblin knocked once, opened the door, and stepped aside. Sharprock was old, or at least, he had the quality of someone who had been exactly this age for a very long time and had stopped finding it interesting. His skin was the color of old oak, his eyes were amber and bright and sharp as anything Harry had ever seen, and his desk was covered in stacks of parchment so precisely organized they looked architectural. He looked up when Harry came in, examined him with an attention that was not quite the same as the deference Tom had offered and was much more useful, and pointed at the chair across from the desk. "Sit." Harry sat. "You look younger than I expected," Sharprock said, which was not a compliment or an insult but simply an observation, the way you might note unexpected weather. "I get that a lot," Harry said. The corner of Sharprock's mouth moved. Not a smile, but the structural precondition for one. "Do you know why your letter was delayed?" "I assumed it was supposed to arrive on my birthday and it was held up somehow." "It arrived at Privet Drive 4 days after your birthday." "It was held, by whom, I cannot legally confirm at this juncture, for 19 days before being released to your residence." Sharprock opened a folder on his desk. "It was eventually released because the standing vault instruction has a built-in enforcement mechanism. Withhold delivery past a certain date, and a copy goes to the Ministry's Department of Goblin Liaison automatically." He paused. "Whoever held it apparently decided that was worse than letting you have it." Harry absorbed that. "Someone in the wizarding world held it." "That is the implication, yes." "And the account," Harry said. "The primary guardian." "Who, that," Sharprock said, and opened the folder fully, spreading the contents across the desk with the deliberate precision of someone laying down a hand of cards, "is what we should discuss." The papers on the desk were old, real old, some of them, the kind of parchment that has yellowed to the particular amber of antique honey. There were signatures Harry didn't recognize, official stamps from the ministry, and a long document at the front that had Potter family estate custodianship across the top in precise, black lettering. "Your parents' estate entered custodianship in November 1981, Sharprock said. "The managing party filed documentation with this bank in January 1982, 2 months after your parents' deaths, which is the first irregularity, since custodianship documentation should be filed within 30 days. The documentation was accepted and processed. The custodian was granted management rights over the active accounts, the property register, and the trust allocation. Harry looked at the signature at the bottom of the custodianship document. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. He'd known, somewhere between reading Sharprock's letter and getting on the train this morning, what name he was going to find. He'd known it the way you sometimes know the answer to a question before you've fully formed it, the way the shape of a shadow tells you what's casting it. It still landed strangely in his chest. Not quite betrayal, that word was too clean. Something more complicated. Something that had weight to it. Is it legal? Harry asked. That, Sharprock said, is where it becomes interesting. He pulled a second document from the stack. The custodianship contract requires 3 things. Documentation of the heir's inability to manage their own affairs, in your case, your age, which is valid. A magical contract witnessed by a ministry official, also present. And the blood signature of either the heir or, in the case of an infant, the heir's designated magical guardian. He set the document down and looked at Harry. Your parents will name Sirius Orion Black as your magical guardian. Harry stared at him. Mr. Black was incarcerated in Azkaban in November 1981, charged, without trial, I should note, which is itself a violation of standard wizarding legal procedure, with the murders of 12 Muggles and the betrayal of your parents. In the absence of the designated guardian, the custodianship documentation was accepted on the basis of a Wisengamot emergency provision that allows for a temporary custodian to be appointed by a Wisengamot official in the event that the designated guardian is incapacitated. Sharprock paused. The Wisengamot official who filed that provision was also Albus Dumbledore. The room was very quiet. He appointed himself, Harry said. He appointed himself, Sharprock confirmed, and his voice had the quality of someone who had been professionally offended by this for 10 years and was deeply glad to finally be saying it out loud. Harry looked down at the papers. At the careful, precise signature. At the chain of documents that formed a wall around his life, built brick by brick in January 1982 by a man who had genuinely, sincerely believed he was doing the right thing. Show me everything, Harry said. The accounts. The withdrawals. The property register. All of it. Sharprock reached under his desk and brought up a ledger the size of a small suitcase, setting it on the desk between them with a sound like a gavel. I was hoping you'd say that, he said. They sat for 2 hours. The numbers were staggering in multiple directions. The Potter estate, the full estate, not just the vault Harry had found coins in last year, was substantial in ways he hadn't imagined. Not just gold. Properties in Scotland, Devon, and Godric's Hollow. Investments in potion supply companies, broom manufacturers, and 3 Muggle companies whose value had apparently grown significantly since James Potter had made quiet initial investments in the late 70s. A library. A formal magical library, catalogued and inventoried, stored in a secured annex of Vault 687, untouched since 1981. The active vault, the one Harry had access to, held a fraction of the total gold. The bulk of the estate's liquid assets were in an investment portfolio that Dumbledore had, technically legally, reorganized in 1982 into a lower-yield long-term structure. Which meant that for 10 years, the Potter estate had been generating returns at approximately a third of its potential rate. Is that theft? Harry asked. It is conservative management, Sharprock said, with the precision of someone choosing their words carefully. The choice could be argued as reasonable. Many custodians adopt a conservative approach. He paused. It becomes more interesting when you examine the expense account. The expense account was a subledger attached to the custodianship record. It recorded charges against the estate for custodial services, administrative overhead, and, listed simply as miscellaneous protective arrangements, a series of regular withdrawals beginning in September 1981. Harry read the line items. What's a protective arrangement? He asked. In this context, Sharprock said, "It appears to cover the costs associated with housing and monitoring a minor ward at a specific Muggle address." He met Harry's eyes. "Your guardians at Privet Drive were paid. Not a large amount. But regularly, and from your estate." Harry was quiet for a moment. The Dursleys had been paid. From his own money. To keep him. He sat with that information and turned it over, examining it from different angles, and felt something that was neither rage nor sadness but some compound of both, hardened by the particular temperature of a long-building understanding. "Cancel it," he said. "Whatever ongoing payments exist, I want them cancelled. That requires a formal instruction, which we will prepare. You will also need to formally revoke the custodianship, which, as you are now 12 and the standing instruction has activated your independent access rights, is well within your legal authority under Goblin banking law." Sharprock produced a fresh sheet of parchment. "There are several documents to sign. What happens when Dumbledore finds out?" Sharprock looked at him steadily. "He will discover, at some point, that the expense account payments have ceased. He may also discover, if he checks, that the custodianship record has been amended. Gringotts does not inform non-account holders of account changes." A pause. "We are a bank, Mr. Potter. Discretion is the foundation of everything we do. And," he added, with what might have been dry satisfaction, "we are deeply displeased about certain aspects of how this account has been managed. You will find us motivated." Harry picked up the quill. The formal revocation of guardianship took 6 signatures across 3 documents. The expense account termination took 2 more. The transfer of active account access, expanding Harry's vault key to cover the full estate, not just Vault 687's coin chamber, required a drop of blood on an official seal, which stung briefly and left a gold imprint of his thumb that shimmered for a moment before settling into the parchment. Then there was a 7th document. "This," Sharprock said, "is optional. But I recommend it." It was a privacy and communication instruction, a formal filing that would route all future Gringotts correspondence to a new secured post box, registered under a discrete address in Diagon Alley, rather than to Privet Drive. Nothing from Gringotts would go to number 4 again. Nothing would go to Hogwarts. No third party would receive updates or notifications. "We can register the post box under your name with a privacy seal," Sharprock said. "It would require a specific key to open, your key. No charm, no spell, no ministry authority could open it without your consent." Harry signed that one without hesitation. Sharprock called in a second goblin, who produced the post box key, small, silver, completely plain, and the address of the secure post box in Diagon Alley. Harry pocketed both. "One more thing," Sharprock said, as Harry stood to leave. He reached into the stack and produced a single card, heavy cream, the Gringotts crest in gold. "If you require access to the family archive, the library in Vault 687's annex, you will need a separate appointment. The archive requires a senior custodian to supervise access on first visit. It was last opened in 1981. He paused. "I reviewed the inventory when preparing for your visit. Your father's research notes are in there. Your mother's as well." Another pause, more deliberate. "So is a significant amount of material on subjects that Gringotts would typically flag as specialized." Harry took the card. "I'll be in touch." "I expect so," Sharprock said. Harry walked out of Gringotts into Diagon Alley and stood in the warm afternoon air and breathed. He'd been in there for 2 hours. The alley was busy in the easy summer way, families with school lists, roving pairs of witches checking the bookshop windows, a cluster of younger children chasing each other around a fountain by the apothecary. Normal, bright, magical, ordinary. He had money. Real money, not just the scoopful of gold coins he'd grabbed last year in a rush of bewilderment and joy. He had an estate. He had a library. He had documentation, copies of which Sharprock had arranged to be sent to his new private post box, of every action taken on his account since 1981. He didn't feel triumphant. He'd expected to feel triumphant. Instead he felt the particular, steady weight of someone who has just understood the dimensions of a room they've been living in for years and is only now realizing how much smaller it was than it should have been. He walked down Diagon Alley slowly, stopping at Flourish and Blots. He bought his second-year textbooks with gold from his own vault and a feeling of proprietary satisfaction that was new and excellent. He bought a set of proper parchment rolls and 3 good quills. He stopped at the apothecary and resupplied his potion ingredients. He went into Quality Quidditch Supplies and spent 5 minutes looking at the Nimbus 2001 in the window. Not yet, but the awareness that he could if he wanted was something warm and solid in the back of his mind. He found a small magical stationer's shop tucked between the Owl Emporium and a robe shop, and bought a charmed notebook, the kind where nothing written inside was readable without the specific wand that had purchased it. He had things to record. Notes from the meeting. Questions he hadn't thought to ask. A list of properties he now technically owned. On the way back to the Leaky Cauldron, he stopped at the post box in the small alcove off the main alley, a row of brass-fronted boxes set into the stone wall, each keyed individually. His was third from the left. He fitted the small silver key and opened it. Empty for now, but real. Private. His. He closed it again, pocketed the key alongside the vault key, and stood there for a moment looking at his name on the brass plate, H. J. Potter, and felt something settle in him. Not loudly. Just quietly, like a stone finding the bottom of still water. He was 12 years old. He had 2 weeks until the school year started. He had, as of this afternoon, access to a library that hadn't been touched since before he could walk, and a list of questions long enough to fill the charmed notebook twice. And Dumbledore didn't know any of it. Harry turned around and walked back to the Leaky Cauldron, bought a pasty and a butterbeer from Tom, ate them at the bar, and caught the flow back to London at 5 o'clock. The train to Little Whinging left at 5:30. He was home before Petunia, before Vernon, before the note on the kitchen table had time to become suspicious. He made dinner, something more than toast, roasted potatoes and chicken from the fridge, actual food, and had it on the table when Petunia came in, which confused her so thoroughly she sat down and ate it without saying a word. Later that night, with the charmed notebook open on his desk, Hedwig preening on her perch, and the summer evening going blue-purple outside his window, Harry made a list. At the top, he wrote, "What did my parents actually leave me?" And underneath, after a pause, "What do I do about Dumbledore?" He didn't write an answer. Not yet. He hadn't earned it yet. The answer would come from the archive, from reading, from understanding what he was actually dealing with. But the question was there now, on real parchment, in his own hand, in a book that no one else could read. That was enough for tonight. Outside, Mrs. Figg's light was still on. Downstairs, the Dursleys' television murmured. The neighborhood settled into its nighttime rhythms, ordinary and unchanging. Harry sat at his desk with the key in one hand and the post box address on a card in the other and looked at both for a long time. He thought about the custodianship signature. The careful ink. The deliberate construction of a structure that had felt, until today, like just the way things were. He thought about being grateful for the wrong things. Then he put the notebook away, turned off the light, and went to sleep. Chapter 2, The Ledger. The archive smelled like his parents. Harry hadn't expected that. He'd braced himself for dust, for cold stone, for the clinical atmosphere of a bank vault, and there was some of that, the temperature dropping noticeably as Sharprock's junior assistant led him down the secondary cart track 3 days after his first visit, the walls narrowing, the lanterns spaced further apart. But when the cart stopped at the iron door marked 687A and the door swung open on the pressure of Harry's key, the smell that rolled out was warm parchment and wood polish and something faintly herbal, dried lavender, he thought, or something like it, and it stopped him in the doorway for a moment longer than he'd intended. "Take as long as you require," the junior goblin said, and stepped back to the cart with the air of someone who had learned not to comment on the emotional reactions of account holders. Harry went inside. The archive was 2 rooms. The first was the library proper, floor-to-ceiling shelves, books and scrolls and bound folders organized with the neat obsession of someone who had cared deeply about finding things quickly. There was a reading desk in the center, a low-burning lamp on it that had presumably been enchanted to stay lit since 1981 and had, apparently, been doing exactly that. The second room was smaller, accessed through an archway. Harry could see a set of wooden trunks along the far wall, each labeled with careful handwriting, and a work table that still had the organized clutter of someone who'd stepped out and hadn't gotten back yet. He stood in the doorway to the second room and looked at the handwriting on the labels for a long moment. James H. Potter, Research Notes, Defense and Concealment. James H. Potter, Personal Correspondence, 1975 to 1981. Lily E. Potter, Research Notes, Charms and Theoretical Applications. Lily E. Potter, Personal Correspondence, 1976 to 1981. Joint, Godric's Hollow House Records, Wards and Protections. Joint, Harry J. Potter, Medical, Educational, Legal. He crossed the room and put his hand on the last trunk. Harry J. Potter, Medical, Educational, Legal. The latch came up without resistance. Inside were folders, organized chronologically. Birth records. A St. Mungo's record from July 31, 1980 with his weight, his first recorded magical incident, at 4 days old. Apparently he'd repaired a small crack in the hospital window, and his parents' signatures at the bottom, tidy and real and completely ordinary. Below that, his educational assessment at age 3, performed by a Ministry of Magic early development office that he'd never known existed. Exceptional magical potential, strong instinctive response, early language acquisition noted. His mother had written in the margin, in different ink, he said, Lumos, while pointing at the lamp today. I am choosing to believe it was intentional. Harry sat on the floor of the archive vault with his back against the work table and read for 20 minutes before he remembered he had a list. He came back 3 times in the 2 weeks before term. Each visit was the same Muggle train, the same Flu connection, the same route through Diagon Alley. He bought a second charmed notebook on his second visit, specifically for research notes, and filled the first 30 pages with a combination of estate records, library catalog entries, and the growing index of his father's research notes, which were extraordinary, dense, fast-thinking, full of digressions and half-formed ideas crossed out and then uncrossed out. James Potter had been working on something in the last year of his life, something involving Fidelius charm modifications and the interaction between blood-based protections and intent-based ones, and while Harry couldn't follow all the theoretical magic, the shape of the thinking was clear. His father had been brilliant. His mother had been, if the notes and letters were any indication, considerably more precise than his father, and had a habit of leaving small, devastating critiques in the margins of James's drafts that made Harry laugh out loud alone in a stone vault 30 feet underground. This is wrong and you know it, L. And then, in James's hand underneath, it's directionally correct, which is basically the same thing. J. And then again in her hand, it is absolutely not the same thing. On his third visit, he found the restricted shelf. It wasn't labeled as restricted. It was simply in the back left corner of the library room, slightly set apart from the main collection, with a dust cover over it that the rest of the shelves didn't have. Harry lifted the cover and found 7 books. 3 of them were advanced defense texts, post-Newt level, the kind that weren't available in Hogwarts library proper, the kind that Hermione would have read in 48 hours and written a cross-referenced index for. 2 were theoretical magic texts, the kind more familiar to academic researchers than practicing wizards. 1 was a thick, plain-covered volume called Dark Object Detection and Containment, a comprehensive field guide, published by an independent press Harry had never heard of. The 7th was handwritten. Bound in dark green leather, no title on the cover. Harry opened it to the first page. Notes on soul fragment magic and its practical implications. Compiled from multiple sources, classified information, and personal research. For the record of the Potter family archive only. James H. Potter, 1980. Harry read the first 3 pages standing up, then sat down at the reading desk and didn't move for 2 hours. He was on the train back to Little Whinging on August 24 when Hermione's letter arrived. Hedwig appeared at the window of the train carriage like she'd been waiting for the opportunity, tapping on the glass with the insistence of an owl who had covered substantial distance and wanted some acknowledgement of the effort. Harry slid the window open, retrieved the letter, and offered her a biscuit from his bag. She ate it with the composure of a professional. Hermione's letters were always dense. He'd received 3 over the summer, each of them twice as long as anyone else's, carefully organized into topics the way her essays were, full of relevant information about their second-year curriculum and the questions she was planning to raise in class. Harry had written back each time, carefully, keeping the tone normal. Yes, looking forward to it, read the textbooks already, have you seen Lockhart's new books? Because he wasn't ready yet. Not quite. This one was different. Harry, I hope you're well and that your summer has been bearable. I've been thinking about something and I want to ask you directly because I've decided that being indirect about things I actually want to know is a waste of everyone's time. Last year I noticed something. A few things, actually, but one in particular. You came back from Christmas with Hagrid, you and Ron, and you seemed different afterward. Not sad, just quieter. I thought at the time it was something that happened over the break, but I've been thinking about it and I don't actually know where you went or what you did. Ron's letters this summer say things like, Harry's fine, without saying anything, and that's the kind of answer you give when you've been told to give that answer rather than because you actually know. I'm also concerned because I've been doing some reading about magical guardianship law. For completely unrelated reasons, my parents wanted to understand more about how wizarding child law worked and I helped them research it, and I came across something interesting. Did you know that Dumbledore is listed as your primary guardian of record in several ministry filings? I found a reference to it in a secondary source on wizarding family law. I wasn't looking for it specifically. It just appeared. I thought you'd want to know, if you didn't already. Write back properly this time. I can tell when you're being careful. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it, put it in his bag, and looked out the window at the countryside moving past. She'd found the guardianship reference herself. Of course she had. Hermione Granger, armed with a library card and a question her parents had asked, had pulled on a single thread and found the same loose seam he had, from the completely opposite direction. He picked up the charmed notebook and a quill. He had been going to tell her eventually. He'd been waiting until he had the full picture, until he understood everything, until he had a complete accounting of what had happened. That was, he admitted to himself looking at the window reflection of his own face, partly sensible and partly the same instinct that made him dodge questions about the cupboard under the stairs, the habit of keeping his real situation to himself because he'd learned early that sharing it sometimes made things worse. Hermione wasn't Vernon Dursley. She wasn't going to make it worse. He opened the notebook to a blank page and wrote her a proper reply. 12 pages, front and back. Everything from the key forward, the key, the train, Sharprock, the custodianship documents, the archive, his parents' notes. All of it. He didn't simplify it or manage it or leave out the parts that were complicated. He just wrote it the way it happened. Then he tore it out, folded it, and handed it to Hedwig. Hermione Granger, he told her. Don't let anyone intercept you. Hedwig left through the train window with the energy of an owl who had been waiting for something worth delivering. The response came 2 days before term, at 11 in the morning, while Harry was reorganizing the contents of his school trunk. It was 4 pages and underlined in 3 different places. Harry James Potter, I need you to understand that I am absolutely furious with you for not telling me this sooner and simultaneously completely understand why you didn't because you have never in your life had good reasons to believe that telling someone something difficult would go well for you. And also this is the most significant thing that has happened in our friendship to date, so I am choosing to be practical rather than emotional about it. The Wisengamot emergency provision he used is called Provision 14C. I looked it up. It exists, it's real, and it does allow for emergency custodianship appointment by a senior Wisengamot official. However, and this is the Part 1 underlined, it is explicitly listed as a temporary provision, valid for no more than 1 calendar year, after which it must be reviewed and renewed by a full Wisengamot vote. There is no record of it being renewed. Which means that legally, the custodianship may have expired in 1983 and everything that happened after that could potentially be challenged. More importantly, Sirius Black. You need to find out what actually happened to him. I know he's in Azkaban and I know what he supposedly did, but you told me Dumbledore used Black's incarceration to justify the emergency appointment, and if there are questions about whether Black actually had a trial, that might be relevant. I have a lot more to say but I'm going to save it for the train. Please don't tell Ron yet. I think you should, eventually, he's going to be upset if you don't, but let's understand it fully first. Also, your mother's marginal notes sound absolutely wonderful. Harry sat on the edge of his bed and felt something unclench in his chest that had been tight for 3 weeks. There it was, that was the difference. He'd been carrying this alone and thinking he was managing, and he had been, technically, but Hermione had just picked up half the weight and immediately started being useful with it. The knot in his shoulders was gone. He wrote back 2 sentences, "See you on the train. We have a lot to talk about." Platform 9 3/4 on the 1st of September was the usual controlled chaos, families clustered around trunks, owls offended by the general situation, first years white-knuckled with excitement and terror, the Hogwarts Express sending great clouds of steam across the platform that made everyone 30 feet away briefly invisible. Harry found Ron at the barrier, which was where Ron always was, red-faced from the effort of steering his trunk in Scabbers' cage and a new owl that was attempting to escape its box. The reunion had the same texture it always did, immediate, warm, requiring no restart. Ron was Ron, unchanged since last term, slightly taller, sunburned across the nose, and deeply pleased to see Harry in the uncomplicated way that Harry had always found quietly excellent. They fought the trunk onto the train together. Found a compartment. Settled in. Scabbers went to sleep in Ron's pocket immediately. The new owl, Errol, technically the family's owl but apparently now being loaned out, glared at the world from inside his box. Hermione arrived 4 minutes later, sliding the compartment door open with her trunk floating behind her under a careful levitation charm, Crookshank's basket under one arm. She looked at Harry across the compartment and there was a whole conversation in the 3 seconds before she sat down. "I got your letter, I've been thinking about it for 2 days straight, we need to talk, but not yet, not here, not in front of Harry," she said. "Hermione," he said. Ron looked between them. "What?" "Nothing," they both said, and Ron looked deeply unconvinced but was distracted by Scabbers waking up and making a bid for freedom, which occupied the next 5 minutes. The train pulled out of the station while Ron was recapturing his rat and Hermione was settling Crookshanks and Harry was looking out the window at London falling away behind them, the backs of houses, the bridges, the grey-green of parks, with the key and the post-box key and the vault key all in the inside pocket of his robes, and the charmed notebook in his bag, and 11 pages of his mother's research notes copied out in his own handwriting because Sharprock had confirmed the originals. Could not leave the archive. The train gathered speed. England opened up around them in its summer green. "So," Harry said, turning from the window, "how was everyone's summer? And then we have other things to talk about." Ron launched into a detailed account of the gnoming incident that had apparently lasted 3 days and involved Percy getting gnawed on the ear, and Harry listened and laughed at the right moments, and Hermione listened too but her eyes kept coming back to Harry with the precise focus of someone doing math in the background of every other activity. Later, when Scabbers was asleep again and Ron was working through a bag of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and the countryside had flattened into the particular landscape of the English Midlands, Hermione said, very casually, "Ron, I've been reading about magical guardianship law this summer." Ron looked up from the beans. "Has something happened?" Hermione glanced at Harry. He gave her a small nod. "Yes," Harry said. "Quite a lot, actually. I should tell you." He told it the same way he'd written it to Hermione, straight through, no hedging, all the relevant details. The key. The train. Sharprock. The custodianship documents and the signature at the bottom. Ron listened with the particular stillness that Harry had come to recognize as Ron actually paying close attention rather than just appearing to, the stillness that meant his brain was working harder than his face was showing. When Harry finished, Ron was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He's been taking your money." "Not directly. He reorganized your estate so it made less money, and he used it to pay the Dursleys, and he appointed himself as your guardian without your blood signature, which you didn't give because you were a baby." Ron's voice was very level. "That's taking your money. That's controlling your life. He stopped. Restarted. "Harry, he's been managing you he searched for the word. "Like an asset," Hermione said quietly. The three of them sat with that for a moment. "He thinks he's doing right by me," Harry said. "Not defending it. Just stating it, because he thought it was true and he needed it to be part of the picture they were all working from. He genuinely believes everything he's done has been for my protection. That's almost the hardest part." "Genuine belief doesn't make it right," Hermione said. "No," Harry agreed. "It doesn't." Ron ate a bean, chewed it, made a face, earthworm, probably, and said, "So what are you going to do?" "Learn everything I can," Harry said. "The archive. My parents' notes. The estate records. There's material in there that I haven't had time to properly go through yet. I need to understand the full picture before I decide anything about Dumbledore." He paused. "And I need to understand something else." "Sirius Black. The murderer?" Ron said, and then immediately looked uncomfortable. "Sorry. Alleged murderer, or, Hermione, you said something about a trial?" "He may never have had one," Hermione said. "The records there are gaps. I found a reference suggesting he was sent directly to Azkaban on Crouch's orders in 1981. Bartemius Crouch Sr., who was head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at the time. He had a reputation for expediency. If Black didn't have a trial," Harry said, "then the conviction might not be valid. And if the conviction isn't valid, then Dumbledore's justification for the emergency custodianship is a lot more complicated," Hermione finished. "Yes. That's what I think too." Ron looked between them again with the expression he got when he felt like the conversation had moved 3 rooms ahead of where he was standing. "I'm going to need more context at some point." "You have the same context we have," Harry said. "We're all working this out at the same time." That seemed to settle Ron, which was the right answer. Not "I'll explain later," not "it's complicated," but "you're already here." Ron relaxed back into his seat. Outside, the sky had started going the amber-gray of early evening. "The Malfoys," Ron said suddenly. Harry looked at him. "First year. Draco kept saying things about Dumbledore. About what Dumbledore thinks, what Dumbledore wants." The way he said it, Ron frowned, working something out. He always talked about Dumbledore like Dumbledore was the person that actually ran things. Not the Ministry, not the Wizengamot. Dumbledore. He looked at Harry. "I thought it was just Draco being Draco. Being dramatic. But if Dumbledore's been filing Wizengamot provisions on his own and appointing himself guardian of dead people's kids, then Lucius Malfoy knows something about how Dumbledore operates," Hermione said. "Which means Draco heard it from his father." "Lucius and Dumbledore don't get along," Harry said slowly. "I know that. But that doesn't mean, it means Lucius has been watching him," Ron said. "People who don't get along still understand each other. My dad says the people who hate you most are always the ones paying closest attention." It was, Harry thought, one of the sharper things he'd heard Ron say, and it landed somewhere useful in the growing architecture of his understanding. The train whistle sounded. Through the window, the light had gone full evening gold, and far ahead in the gathering dusk, Harry could just make out, or imagined he could, the beginning of something rising against the sky. Hogwarts. The sorting was the same sacred chaos it always was, terrified 11-year-olds, the hat song, the teachers at the high table, the enchanted ceiling doing its September 1st thing with a sky full of stars beginning to appear. Harry watched it from the Gryffindor table with the particular dual-layered perception of someone experiencing something familiar while knowing things about it that changed its texture. The hall was the same. The food was the same. Dumbledore, at the center of the high table, was exactly the same, benevolent, serene, surveying his school with an expression of genuine warmth that had never once struck Harry as anything other than sincere. It still didn't strike him as insincere. That was the thing. Harry watched Dumbledore welcome the new students and felt no version of the easy villain narrative rage he might have expected to feel. What he felt was more careful than that. More patient. He looked at the high table properly for what might have been the first time. Dumbledore, center. McGonagall to his right, steady and exact as a plumb line. Snape 3 seats down, not watching Harry for once, watching the new Slytherins with the assessing look of a head of house doing inventory. And beside the empty defense chair, because of course, there was always an empty defense chair by the time term started, the new defense against the dark arts teacher. Gilderoy Lockhart. Harry had encountered Lockhart's books in flourish and blots during his Diagon Alley visits, had in fact been present at the disastrous book signing where Lockhart had used him as a publicity prop, which had irritated him considerably at the time and irritated him more in retrospect. Lockhart was golden-haired and broadly smiling and wearing robes that were genuinely too decorative for a Tuesday, and he was looking at Harry right now with the specific expression of a man calculating how a thing might be useful to him. Harry looked back, just long enough for the calculation to register, and then looked away. "He's supposed to be brilliant," Ron said, following Harry's gaze. "According to Mum." "Your mum also thought Lockhart's books were worth buying 7 copies of," Harry said. "That's what came in the post." "Don't say that to her face," Ron said. "He's a fraud," Hermione said, with the calm certainty of someone who has done the reading and found the footnotes unconvincing. "Or at least, the events described in his books don't hold together properly. The dates overlap in ways that suggest he couldn't have been in 2 of the locations he claims simultaneously. I've been cross-referencing." "Of course you have," Ron said, but with affection. "Someone did those things," Hermione said. "The real werewolf in Wagga Wagga, the real Hag outbreak in Minsk. Someone dealt with them. It wasn't Lockhart. So the question is what Lockhart actually does and why Dumbledore hired him." Harry filed that away. Everything was going in the filing system now, the thing that had started with a key in the Dursleys' mail and had grown, over the summer, into a habit of noticing. Of cataloging. Of connecting. Dumbledore stood to welcome everyone and make announcements, and Harry watched him speak rather than listening to the words. The warmth in the room when Dumbledore stood was real, students leaned slightly toward him, faculty straightened up, even the enchanted ceiling seemed to brighten a degree. He had a quality of earned authority that was different from Snape's demanded respect or McGonagall's precise expectation. He radiated safety. Harry thought about Sharprock saying "We do not have your blood signature," and watched Dumbledore radiate safety, and thought about how the most effective cages are the ones that feel like homes. Then dinner appeared and Ron said, "Finally," and the moment passed. The dungeons were the same. Snape's potions classroom hadn't changed, the same pickled things in jars, the same low lighting, the same temperature that suggested the heating charms were applied by someone who believed that cold builds character. What had changed was Harry. He sat at the same bench as Ron, same position, Hermione to his left, Ron to his right, and opened his potions textbook to the second-year curriculum page and scanned it with the focused attention of someone who had spent 2 weeks reading material well beyond this level. His parents' library had defense and theoretical magic, but it also had advanced potions texts, because his more actions write the next chapter now. Chapter 3, The Weight of Gold. The first attack happened on a Tuesday. Harry knew about it before most of the school did, which was either good luck or the result of having spent the previous 3 weeks building the habit of knowing things early. He was in the corridor outside Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, following a lead from his father's notes about Slytherin-era plumbing that he'd been quietly investigating between classes, when he heard the cat. "Mrs. Norris was hanging by her tail from a torch bracket, stiff and grey-eyed and very clearly not dead but not quite alive either, and below her on the wall in letters that dripped dark red against the stone, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the heir, beware." He stood there for 5 seconds. Read it twice. Looked at the floor and saw the water. The flooding from Myrtle's bathroom had apparently spilled into the corridor, which meant someone had been in there, which meant the entrance was almost certainly in there. Then the sound of the Halloween feast ending hit the corridor from below, the distant thunder of 300 students heading upstairs, and Harry made 2 quick decisions: stay, and look calm. Ron and Hermione found him there because they'd come from the feast the same route. Ron pulled up short, saw the cat, and swore. Hermione took in the writing on the wall, the cat, Harry's expression, and said nothing, because she was already reading the writing a second time and cataloguing it. The crowd arrived 30 seconds later. Filch came first, which was unlucky timing. He appeared at the end of the corridor, took one look at Mrs. Norris, and the sound he made was somewhere between a name and a howl. He turned on Harry immediately, and Harry didn't flinch or back up because there was nothing to flinch from. He hadn't done anything to Mrs. Norris, and the guilty person response of stepping backward would only make things worse. "You," Filch said. "You did this." "I found her like this," Harry said. "Flat, clear, not defensive. About 40 seconds before you did. More students. More crowd pressure." Dumbledore arrived with the smooth speed of someone who had anticipated this general category of event, and Harry watched him look at the wall and at the cat and at Harry in quick succession, and saw in Dumbledore's face something that was not quite surprise, more like the expression of someone who has been waiting for a thing to happen and is now working out how it happened faster than expected. "No one did this tonight," Dumbledore said, to Filch and to the crowd and perhaps to himself. "Mrs. Norris has been petrified. She is not dead." He looked at the 4 teachers who had gathered. "Pomfrey can reverse it." Then, to Filch, "Let me take her." Filch didn't want to relinquish her. The sequence that followed was the predictable one: Dumbledore, Snape, Lockhart all weighing in, Filch's grief performing itself loudly, the suggestion that Harry and his friends go with the teachers to discuss it. Harry went, because refusing was pointless and because the conversation in Lockhart's office was genuinely revealing. Lockhart's office was extraordinary in the specific way of a room that contained more photographs of one person than any functional space required. Every surface had a framed image of Lockhart in some heroic configuration, most of them waving cheerfully. The bookshelves were exclusively his own titles. There was a large mirror above the fireplace that appeared to be charmed to say complimentary things, and Harry caught it beginning to formulate a sentence about his smile before Lockhart stepped in front of it. "My office," Lockhart said, as though he were presenting a gift. "Sit down, sit down." Harry sat. Ron and Hermione sat. Snape stood by the door with the expression of a man attending a meeting that should not be happening. "I know what happened," Lockhart announced, with the cheerful authority of someone who had read about a thing in one of his own books. "Classic case of, well, I won't bore you with the technical details, but I've dealt with this sort of cursed inscription business before. Romania, I believe. Or possibly, somewhere else." He waved a hand. "Point is, I can handle it." "You can handle a petrifaction curse?" Snape said, with a tone that was technically a question but was actually a scalpel. Lockhart turned a smile on Snape that had all the structural integrity of wet parchment. "I've handled far worse." Harry looked at Lockhart and thought about what Hermione had said on the train: someone did those things, it wasn't Lockhart, and then looked at Dumbledore, who was watching the exchange with the serene expression of a chess player who has already seen all the available moves and is waiting for the board to catch up. Dumbledore knew Lockhart was a fraud. Harry was suddenly quite certain of it. He didn't know why Dumbledore had hired him regardless, but the careful neutrality on Dumbledore's face wasn't the neutrality of someone uncertain, it was the neutrality of someone who had made a decision and was watching it play out. One more thing to file away. When they were dismissed, no conclusions, no answers. Filch's grief redirected into suspicion of Harry that would simmer and boil throughout the term. Harry walked back to the Gryffindor common room with Ron and Hermione and said nothing until they were through the portrait hole and in a corner of the common room far enough from other students to have a real conversation. "The entrance is in Myrtle's bathroom," he said quietly. Ron and Hermione both looked at him. "The water on the floor," he said. "It came from Myrtle's bathroom. The flooding. Someone was in there, and whoever opened the chamber didn't need to go very far to do it, they were already in the right place." He opened his research notebook. "My father's notes mention that Slytherin's hidden passage would have been concealed using Parseltongue activation, a speaking lock. A plumbing source in the school's oldest section." He looked up. "Myrtle's bathroom is in one of the castle's original turrets. It's the right age." "You want to go look," Hermione said. "I want to go look," Harry confirmed. "Tonight?" Ron said. "Give me a few days. I want to read more of my father's notes first. There's a section on basilisk defense that I haven't finished yet." He saw Ron's expression. "I'll explain later. The short version is that the creature in the chamber is something very specific, and knowing what it is before we go looking for its home is just sensible." "Basilisk," Hermione breathed. She'd heard the word. Oh. Oh. She was already calculating, her expression shifting through alarm to the particular focused intensity that meant she'd found a thread she could pull. Indirect sight. That's why Mrs. Norris was petrified rather than, she stopped. "Rather than dead," Harry finished. "Yes. She saw the reflection, not the real thing." Ron said, very carefully, "What kills someone if they see it directly?" "A basilisk," Harry said. "Giant serpent. King of serpents. Eyes kill on direct contact." He looked at Ron evenly. "So we don't look directly at it." Ron absorbed this. "Right," he said, after a moment. "Right, simple. It also responds to Parseltongue," Harry added. "Which is relevant." The three of them were quiet for a moment. The fire crackled. Somewhere across the common room, 2 third-years were arguing about Quidditch. "We need to find the diary before any of this matters," Hermione said. "If someone is controlling the opening, using the fragment object, then the basilisk is responding to the diary's instructions. Destroy the diary, no more instructions." "Find the diary," Harry agreed. "That's the priority." Quidditch practice the next morning was cold and fast and enormously good for Harry's mood in the specific way that being 600 feet in the air always was. He'd pushed for early morning practices as a tactical matter. The Gryffindor pitch slot system rewarded early risers, and would had seized on Harry's suggestion with the enthusiasm of someone who had been handed a perfectly wrapped gift. Harry flew the way he always flew, which was with the kind of abandon that looked instinctive but was the result of 2 years of learned trust in his own body's reactions. The Nimbus 2000 was excellent, still the best in their squad, though Malfoy's arrival on the pitch at the end of practice with the entire Slytherin team mounted on Nimbus 2001s made Wood's eye twitch visibly. "New brooms," Malfoy said, to no one and everyone, with the satisfaction of a person delivering bad news disguised as idle observation. He was looking at Harry in the specific way Harry had come to recognize as calculated, not pure hatred, but something more tactical. Assessment. Like he was checking a measurement. "Well done to Slytherin's parents for their bank accounts," Harry said mildly. Malfoy's eyes narrowed. "You might want to be careful, Potter. The chambers opened. Could be all sorts of things happening to undesirable students this year." The Gryffindor team went still. It was the specific stillness of people deciding how offended to be and at what volume. Harry tilted his head slightly. "That almost sounds like a warning. From someone with prior knowledge." He kept his voice perfectly even, perfectly conversational. "Interesting." Malfoy's composure cracked just slightly, a fraction of a second, quickly sealed. Harry watched it happen and noted it. "He does have prior knowledge." He hadn't been quite certain before. He was now. Training sessions over, Harry said to Wood, stepping back. Shall we? He walked off the pitch with the Gryffindor team behind him, and didn't look back at Malfoy, because looking back would have suggested that the conversation had bothered him. It hadn't. It had, in fact, been useful. He found Lucius Malfoy in Diagon Alley 3 days later. This was not planned. This was the consequence of Harry using his Gringotts Floo connection for his 4th archive visit, a Saturday morning, Ron covering for him in the common room with a story about the Ollery, and exiting through the leaky cauldron at 10:30 to walk through Diagon Alley on the way to his post box. The post box had 3 items in it. A formal summary of the terminated custodianship arrangement from Sharprock's office, signed and sealed. A list of the Potter estate properties with current occupancy status, most of them empty, which was its own kind of discovery. And a small card from Sharprock directly: we have identified 2 additional irregular transactions from 1985 and 1988 respectively. Available for review at your convenience. Harry pocketed all 3, turned from the post box, and nearly walked into Lucius Malfoy. Or rather, Lucius Malfoy was 20 feet away at the entrance to the apothecary, speaking to a stooped witch who appeared to be the owner, with a large bag at his feet and a cane in his right hand that was more accessory than necessity. He was dressed the way Harry associated with absolute confidence in one's own place in a room, dark robes, spotless, the silver head of his cane catching the morning light. He looked like someone who had arranged for the light to catch it. Beside him, partly obscured by the apothecary doorway, was a slight, dark-haired girl about Harry's age who was looking down the alley with the expression of someone who was present but had learned to be invisible. She was holding a stack of used schoolbooks. The girl had a Gringotts bag hanging from her wrist. She'd been here for the summer sale, used books, end-of-season clearance. Harry's eyes caught the titles, second-year standard texts, the same ones he'd bought new at Flourish and Blots, but these were heavily annotated, the covers battered. Lucius turned from the apothecary owner and his eyes found Harry with the smooth, unsurprised precision of someone who was very good at noticing entrances. "Potter," he said. "Mr. Malfoy," Harry said. They looked at each other. The morning traffic of Diagon Alley moved around them with cheerful indifference. The girl, Ginny Weasley, Harry registered, younger sister, first year, he'd met her briefly at the station but couldn't place the face until now, looked between them with wide brown eyes. Lucius Malfoy was a man who had learned to use the pause the way other people use weapons. He let it extend for 2 full seconds, assessing Harry with amber eyes that held no particular warmth and a great deal of calculating intelligence. "Shopping alone," he said finally. "I prefer it," Harry said. "No escort?" "No, guidance." The word had a very small, very precise weight to it. "I manage," Harry said. "Yourself?" Something moved in Lucius's expression, not quite amusement, but its first cousin. He was recalibrating, Harry could see it. He'd expected something younger, something more managed. He'd expected Dumbledore's Harry. "Draco mentioned you'd been different this term," Lucius said, and it was more candid than Harry expected, more direct. More settled. "I know where I stand," Harry said. "Makes it easier." "Does it?" "Not a question. More like a confirmation, the way you confirm coordinates on a map." "You're visiting your account." "My accounts," Harry said. "Plural." He watched Lucius hear the plural and file it. A moment passed. Lucius reached into the inner pocket of his robes and produced a small, plain journal. Dark cover, no markings. He turned it over in one elegant hand with the casualness of someone handling something completely insignificant, and then looked at Harry with eyes that were doing very complex work behind their surface. "Remarkable things, old books," he said. "The things they remember." He was showing it to him. Harry understood that immediately. This was deliberate, the casual display, the significant words. Lucius Malfoy was not a man who was careless with props. He was communicating something. Harry looked at the journal. kept his face entirely neutral. The description from his father's notes was exact and specific, and the object in Lucius Malfoy's hand matched it precisely: small, dark, hand-sized, the kind that would fit in a student's bag, the kind that would be unremarkable among 50 other books. Not very remarkable, really, Harry said pleasantly. Old books tend to fall apart if you're not careful. He held Lucius's gaze. Lucius's chin tilted very slightly upward, not quite respect, not quite surprise, but acknowledgement of something, and then he slipped the journal back into his pocket and looked away down the alley. "Good morning, Potter," he said. Harry stepped around him, past Ginny Weasley, who was watching him with enormous eyes, and walked down the alley at a perfectly unhurried pace. He didn't speed up. He didn't look back. He turned into the first side passage he reached, pressed his back against the wall, and breathed once, slowly. The diary was with Lucius. Not at the school yet. Lucius had it, and he'd shown it to Harry on purpose, which meant one of two things: either Lucius was confident enough in his own position that the show of force was recreational, or he was testing what Harry knew. Harry needed to know which one. He pulled out his charmed notebook and wrote 3 fast sentences. Then he sealed it and tucked it away and walked back to the leaky cauldron with the steady step of someone who had a great deal to do and a reasonable timeline to do it in. The dueling club was Lockhart's idea, which was the first warning. The second warning was that Snape was involved, because any situation where Lockhart and Snape were on the same stage was structurally unstable in ways that physics should probably classify. Harry sat in the great hall with the assembled student body and watched Lockhart explain the basics of magical dueling with the authority of a man describing something he had read about, and watched Snape watch Lockhart with the patience of a snake watching an enthusiastically oblivious mouse, and thought, something is going to go wrong here, and then something educational is going to happen. He was right. The demonstration duel, Lockhart versus Snape, lasted approximately 6 seconds before Lockhart was lying on the floor with his hat covering his face and Snape was adjusting his sleeves. The assembled students were paired for practice, which was where things became genuinely interesting. Harry was paired with Draco Malfoy, which was either Snape's deliberate choice or the universe making a thematic decision. They stood at opposite ends of their strip of floor. Draco had the expression of someone who had practiced this specific situation in his head multiple times and was pleased with how it was going so far. He went with a snake, Serpensortia, probably because he'd seen the Parseltongue incident in first year and thought it was a vulnerability. The snake hit the floor and turned immediately toward a Hufflepuff student named Justin Finch-Fletchley, who went rigid with terror. Harry stepped forward and spoke to the snake without thinking about it, the same instinct that had kicked in during the incident with Dudley's snake at the zoo, the same language that felt less like speaking and more like meaning. He told it to stop. To back away. To be calm. It stopped. It turned and looked at him and was calm. The room was very quiet. Harry looked up from the snake. Several people had stepped back from him with the specific body language of recalibration. Hermione's expression was carefully neutral. Ron looked unsurprised. Draco looked, this was interesting, not triumphant, but thoughtful, in the way he sometimes looked when a chess move had produced results he hadn't predicted. Lockhart made a speech about dark magic that indicated he wasn't entirely sure what he'd just witnessed. Snape vanished the snake with a precision that suggested he'd done it to prevent further complications rather than out of any concern for the Hufflepuff. You spoke to it, a voice said. Justin Finch-Fletchley, shaken, staring at Harry. You're a Parselmouth. Apparently, Harry said. You told it to, you were talking to it. I told it to stop, Harry said patiently. How do I know you didn't tell it to? You're not a statue, Harry said, which is a fairly good indication of what I told it. The logical clarity of this didn't fully land with Justin, who looked at him for a moment longer with wide eyes and then moved away. Harry watched him go and thought, this is going to become a rumor and then a narrative, and the narrative will say Parselmouth means heir of Slytherin, which means chamber opener, which means someone's going to be helpfully distracted looking in the wrong direction. He filed that under inconvenient but manageable. What he actually did with it, quietly, in the privacy of his own planning, was recognize that his ability to speak to the basilisk wasn't just tactically useful. It was potentially the cleanest resolution to the whole situation. If he could reach the chamber, if he could command the basilisk to stand down, if he could neutralize the diary first, he needed more from the archive. The second attack was Colin Creevey, who survived because he'd been looking at Harry through a camera lens rather than directly. The camera was destroyed. Colin was petrified in the hospital wing. Word spread through the school in the usual pattern, whisper to corridor to rumor to legend in approximately 48 hours. Harry visited the hospital wing. Not because he'd been asked to. Not because it was strategically useful. He went because Colin was 11 years old and had spent the first 2 months of term following Harry around with a camera and asking questions with the enthusiastic brightness of someone for whom the wizarding world was still new and extraordinary, and Harry remembered what that felt like. He sat by the bed for 10 minutes and said nothing, which was all there was to do. Madame Pomfrey found him there and said nothing either. She looked at him and looked at Colin and nodded very slightly, in the way of someone revising an assessment. Harry nodded back and left. On the way out of the hospital wing he passed McGonagall coming in, and their eyes met in the corridor, and McGonagall said, "Potter." "Professor." She looked at him, a proper look, the kind she rarely gave, the one that meant she was actually evaluating rather than maintaining. "You're managing well," she said. Not a compliment. An observation. "I'm trying to," he said. "If you have concerns. About the school. About your safety or anyone else's." She paused in the particular way she had, the one that meant she was choosing words with structural precision. "My office." "Thank you," Harry said, and meant it. She walked on. He stood in the corridor for a moment and thought, she knows something is wrong, she has known since the start of term, and she cannot act on it without evidence, and she is watching for someone to bring her some. He added it to the filing system. McGonagall, potential ally, requires evidence, approached carefully. Ron was waiting in the common room with the chess board set up and an expression that meant he'd been thinking. "Polyjuice potion," he said, when Harry sat down. Harry moved a pawn. "What about it?" "Hermione's been in the library for 6 hours. She came out once, looked at me like I was a problem she'd already solved, and went back." Ron moved a knight. "She's making something. In Myrtle's bathroom." He paused. "And before you ask, yes, I noticed that too, Myrtle's bathroom." She picked Myrtle's bathroom. "She's being practical," Harry said. "Nobody goes in there. And she's making something with lacewing flies and leeches and bicorn horn, which I know because she asked me to get them from the potions cupboard and I looked up the combination." Ron met his eyes across the board. "Polyjuice potion. 2 months to brew. We'd be able to look like Slytherins." Harry was quiet for a moment, moving his bishop. "We'd need heirs. From Slytherins who might know something." Ron's expression was carefully balanced between enthusiasm and the realistic acknowledgement that stealing hairs from people was not a simple proposition. "Crabbe and Goyle are thick enough that it wouldn't be hard. And if Malfoy tells anyone where the diary is, he doesn't tell Crabbe and Goyle anything that matters," Harry said. "But his dormitory might." He thought about it. "It's a reasonable plan. 2 months is a long time though." "Hermione said she started the lacewing flies last week," Ron said. "So we're actually at 7 weeks." Harry looked at him. "She started before she told us." "She started when she got the idea," Ron said, with the completely untroubled air of someone who had made peace with this a long time ago. "She does that." Harry found himself grinning despite everything. "All right," he said. 7 weeks. He moved his queen. "In the meantime, I want to look at Myrtle's bathroom. Properly." "When?" "Saturday night. After 11. Can you do disillusionment?" Ron made a face. "I can do partial disillusionment." "Partial will do," Harry said. "Also get me a mirror. Small one, pocket-sized. Ron looked at him. For the basilisk, Harry said. If we end up further along than I'm planning. Ron stared at him for another moment, then moved a rook and said, I thought you said it was just reconnaissance. It probably will be, Harry said honestly. But I'd rather have the mirror. Saturday arrived grey and cold, the castle settling into its November mood, and Harry and Ron waited until the common room had emptied and the clock above the fireplace said 11:15 before slipping out. Harry had the invisibility cloak. Ron had the pocket mirror and a second year's grasp of the disillusionment charm, which was actually better than most second years because Bill Weasley had apparently taught him the theory in writing, and theory combined with Harry's reading of the same charm in his mother's notes had refined Ron's technique enough that they moved through the castle corridors as a mostly invisible smear with 2 sets of feet. Myrtle's bathroom. Harry pushed the door open. The room was wet. It was always wet, the perpetual state of a bathroom haunted by a ghost with a complicated relationship to plumbing. The stalls were damp, the mirrors spotted. Myrtle herself was not in evidence, which was a small mercy. Harry stood in the center of the room and looked at the sinks. There were 6 of them in a row, the old kind, cracked and stained, each with a different tap. He walked along the row slowly, looking not at the surfaces but at the bases, where sink met floor, where pipe met wall. He was looking for something his father's notes had described as a serpentine design, possibly incorporated into the pipe architecture itself. Harry, Ron said softly. 3rd sink from the left. The tap was different from the others, not obviously, not in a way that would catch the casual eye, but the metal had a pattern worked into it that the others didn't. Harry leaned closer. Looked at it properly. Small, coiled serpents, worked into the metal around the base of the tap. He straightened up. Looked at the sink. Thought about it for a moment, not theatrically, just the brief pragmatic consideration of someone with a reasonable instinct for when to push forward and when to gather more information first. This was information gathering. He wasn't opening anything tonight. He needed the basilisk defense research finished first. He needed to know if the diary had moved from Lucius's possession to the school. He needed the polyjuice potion at least started, needed to understand whether Draco knew where the diary was kept, needed to know how close to term's end the chamber opened, because his father's notes had mentioned something about a solstice connection, a specific astronomical trigger. He took out his charmed notebook and sketched the tap. The exact pattern of the serpents. The position relative to the others. He measured the sink with his hands and wrote the dimensions. Then he straightened up and looked at the room once more, the dripping taps, the spotted mirrors, the damp floor. Somewhere below them, through whatever passage this tap concealed, was something ancient and dangerous and probably dormant, waiting for instructions from a piece of Tom Riddle's soul. Found what you needed? Ron asked. Found what I needed, Harry confirmed. He tucked the notebook away. Let's go. On the way back through the corridors, moving carefully under the cloak, Ron said quietly, Harry. Yeah. When this is done, the chamber, the diary, all of it, what happens with Dumbledore? Harry thought about it. The key in his pocket. The post box address. The estate documents. His parents' notes, copied out in his own handwriting, 140 pages of it, accumulating in the charmed notebook. The filing system in his head that was growing daily. I'm not ready to do anything about Dumbledore yet, he said. I need the full picture first. You keep saying that. Because it's still true, Harry said. There's a difference between knowing someone has done wrong and being able to prove it in a way that matters. Sharprock's building a case. The Gringotts documentation is real and official. But Dumbledore has the Ministry, the Wisengamot, the Prophet, and every wizard in Britain who thinks the sun rises on his order. He paused. You don't challenge that with anger. You challenge it with evidence. Ron was quiet for a moment. Your dad, he said. Would he have liked you? The you are now. The question caught Harry slightly off guard, which was why it was such a good one. He thought about the notes, the handwriting, the margin comments. The crossed-out ideas and the uncrossing. The letter to Lily that he'd read twice and put down carefully because it was private even if it was addressed to someone who couldn't receive it anymore. I think so, Harry said. I think he would have appreciated the plan. And your mum? She'd have caught the errors in my plan, Harry said. And told me they were wrong and I should know better. Ron laughed, quietly, in the dark corridor under the cloak. The castle breathed around them, ancient and cold and enormous. You have more of them than you did in September, Ron said. That's what I mean. You know things about them now. Yeah, Harry said. I do. They reached the portrait hole. The fat lady was asleep, her painted snores decorating the corridor. Harry said the password and she startled and huffed and swung open, and they climbed through into the warm red gold of the empty common room. Harry sat in his usual chair by the fire. Ron dropped onto the sofa. Crab's hair, Ron said, returning to practicalities with the ease of someone who processed emotional moments by moving through them. Hermione says she needs it by December at the latest. I've been working on a plan involving sleeping cakes. Sleeping cakes, Harry repeated. Small cakes with a sleeping draft baked in. Leave them somewhere Crabbe and Goyle will find them, basically anywhere, and then collect the hairs while they're unconscious. Ron said it with the brisk confidence of a man who had thought this through. It's elegant. It's something, Harry agreed. Fred and George helped with the draft. They have potion skills that don't make it onto their report cards. We'll use it, Harry said. He looked at the fire. Outside the common room windows, rain had started, stippling the glass. Ron. Yeah. Thank you. For being in this. Ron looked slightly embarrassed by this, the way he always did when something direct was said to him, and then settled into it with the ease of someone who actually meant it. Wouldn't be anywhere else, he said. Besides, you clearly need someone to stop you having interesting ideas with no backup plan. The mirror is a backup plan. The mirror is a contingency, Ron said. That's not the same thing. Harry smiled at the fire. Outside, the rain came harder. He was in the archive 5 days later, working through the last section of his father's basilisk notes, when he found the addendum. It was folded separately, tucked into the back of the green leather notebook, a single page in his father's handwriting, dated 2 months before Harry was born, written faster than the rest of the notes with an urgency that bled through the page. Additional note, the fragment object. I have confirmed through Dumbledore's own published work on magical resonance, paper from 1945, easily overlooked, that such objects are vulnerable to the same forces that destroy their original creator. Emotional resonance as amplifier. But more practically, a basilisk's fang. Venom sufficient to unmake the fragment entirely, provided the one wielding it hasn't been drained by the basilisk's own bite. Which means, go in prepared. Go in with an antidote. The archive has all of this. Don't do it alone. J.P. Harry sat with the page in his hand for a long moment. His father had known. Had worked it out, had researched it, had written a warning intended for someone who might someday need it, and hadn't known it was his own son, couldn't have known, had just put it in the archive because that was what you did with knowledge that mattered. Don't do it alone. He took out his charmed notebook and started writing a list of what he needed. Basilisk antidote. Route to the chamber. The diary's location. A plan for the fawn. It wasn't a complete plan yet. But it was the shape of one. He folded his father's note carefully and put it in his inner pocket. December arrived, and with it 2 things, the polyjuice potion reaching its ready stage, which Hermione confirmed with the kind of satisfaction that only she could derive from a technically demanding illegal brew, and Lucius Malfoy's arrival at the school for a governor's meeting. Harry knew about the meeting from the estate post box. Sharprock had included a notice, forwarded through the Gringotts intelligence network that Harry was fairly sure operated semi-independently of the ministry, indicating that Lucius Malfoy had recently attended 2 governors' sessions and had been lobbying aggressively on curriculum matters. The subtext, as Harry read it, was that Lucius was positioning for something. He stood at the top of the entrance hall stairs and watched Lucius arrive. Lucius moved through the school entrance with the calm possession of someone who had made a decision about what this place owed him and had never reconsidered it. He was with two other governors Harry didn't recognize, and he was listening to one of them speak while scanning the entrance hall with the peripheral awareness of a very intelligent, very alert person. His gaze found Harry on the stairs. Harry met it, held it for a moment, and then continued down the stairs at an unhurried pace, because he had a class to get to and Lucius Malfoy's gaze was something to be acknowledged, not avoided. "Potter," Lucius said, as Harry passed. Harry paused. Turned. "Mr. Malfoy. Visiting?" "Governor's duties," Lucius said smoothly. Something in his expression was different from the Diagon Alley meeting, more formal, more covered, the extra layer that public settings required. "How is term treating you?" "Very well," Harry said. "I've been reading extensively." A fraction of a pause. "Have you?" "My parents left quite a library," Harry said pleasantly. "I've been getting to know it." He let that land, then added, "Enjoy your meeting." He walked away toward the dungeons for potions, and heard nothing behind him because Lucius was too controlled to react audibly, but he felt the quality of the silence and it was exactly the silence of someone recalibrating very quickly. He was in potions and had his cauldron set up before he registered that he was almost enjoying this. Not the danger. Not the deaths and the petrifications and the cold weight of what the diary contained. Those were real and serious and he never lost sight of them for a moment. But the chess of it, the matching of intelligence against intelligence, the slow, deliberate construction of a position, that felt like something his father would have understood. He looked down at his cauldron and started his work. The Polyjuice plan executed on the last Hogsmeade weekend before Christmas break, in 3 stages, sleeping cakes left in the corridor, Crabbe and Goyle rendered unconscious, hairs collected. It was, Ron had to admit, considerably more elegant in execution than it sounded in description. Harry took Goyle's hair, Ron took Crabbe's, and Hermione, who had been reading ahead and had found a Gryffindor girl with a strong physical resemblance to Millicent Bulstrode, took a hair from a piece of robes that turned out, later, to be from Millicent's cat rather than Millicent herself. They didn't discover this until the transformation was in progress. Harry, as Goyle, stood in the cubicle next to a Hermione who made sounds that escalated from worrying to alarming to Madame Pomfrey levels of concerning, and called through the partition, "Hermione. Hermione, what, go," she said, in a voice that was doing something structurally strange to its own vowels. "Go, I'll be fine, just go." "You're not, I'll be fine, it's not dangerous, please just go and find the diary before this wears off." Harry and Ron, in the shapes of Crabbe and Goyle, walked to the Slytherin common room. The password was something they'd gotten from a 4th-year Slytherin in Ron's herbology group who owed Ron a favor and hadn't asked why. Pure blood. Of course it was. The portrait swung open on stone and darkness and a common room that was, Harry had to admit, more interesting than their common room, lower, more cave-like, with green light filtering through the lake-facing windows and an atmosphere that felt actively gothic rather than aspirationally so. Draco was there, alone with Pansy Parkinson, who gave them both a dismissive look and returned to her magazine. It was Ron who'd anticipated Draco's approach, Ron, who'd been thinking about how Draco talked to Crabbe and Goyle, who'd noted he talks at them more than to them, he just wants an audience. And it worked. Draco started talking almost immediately, the things he'd been keeping bottled in Slytherin House where he couldn't be too obvious, spilling out in the slightly reckless way of someone who'd been saving it. He didn't know where the diary was. Not specifically. He knew his father had given it to someone at the school, someone who could use it, and he knew the chamber was real and opening and he found the whole thing both thrilling and frightening in roughly equal measure. He talked about the heir of Slytherin the way you talk about a parent's plan you've been told parts of but not the whole of. He knew the shape, not the details. Whoever father gave it to, Draco said, they don't need any help. The diary does it all. The diary does it all. Harry, in Goyle's body, felt the words land. The diary was autonomous. Once given to someone, it operated independently, finding its conduit, opening the chamber on its own schedule, responding to its own internal logic. Lucius had given it to someone vulnerable, someone who would become its instrument without understanding what they were holding. He thought about Ginny Weasley, standing outside the apothecary with a stack of used schoolbooks. He thought about Lucius's bag. He thought about the Gringotts' note about the irregular transactions. Find the host. Find the diary. The polyjuice wore off in the corridor outside Slytherin, the uncomfortable rushing reversal of borrowed shape, and Ron said, that was revolting, with a specificity that suggested he was filing the experience under experiences not to repeat, and Harry said nothing because he was thinking hard. Ginny Weasley, he said. Ron stopped. What? She had a bag of used schoolbooks in Diagon Alley. Lucius was there. He had the diary with him. Ron, he looked at Ron directly, your sister. The color changed in Ron's face. We need to find it before it does any more damage, Harry said. And I think I know how. Chapter 4, The Diary. Ginny Weasley was not okay. Harry had been watching her without making it obvious for 3 weeks, the way she sat at meals with her food going cold, the way she moved through corridors with the particular flinching awareness of someone who had been startled too many times in a row, the dark crescents under her eyes that said she wasn't sleeping. She was 11 years old and she was being eaten from the inside by something she didn't have a name for, and the fact that it had taken Harry this long to see it properly made his jaw tight with something that wasn't quite anger at himself but lived in the same neighborhood. Ron had seen it too, and the seeing was costing him. He kept starting sentences about Ginny that he didn't finish, at breakfast, in the common room, in the corridors between classes. A half-formed she seems or I noticed she that trailed off into the particular silence of someone whose worry is running ahead of their vocabulary. Harry let him have the unfinished sentences. Pushing wouldn't help. What would help was finding the diary. The problem was Ginny's bag. She was 11 and she was frightened and she was clearly being controlled by something she didn't understand, and walking up to her and saying please let me search your belongings, I think a piece of Voldemort's soul is living in your diary was not a plan with a strong success rate. Harry had run through the versions of that conversation in his head and none of them ended with Ginny handing anything over. The diary, if it was working the way his father's notes described, would have built a relationship with her. It would have made itself necessary. It would have been, until very recently, the best friend she'd ever had. That was the architecture of it. His father's note had described soul fragment objects as fundamentally parasitic, not just dark, but specifically designed to feed on the vulnerability of whoever held them. It would have found her loneliness, a first-year girl from a large family with no money and 5 older brothers, going to a school full of people who already knew each other, already had their groups and their histories and their running jokes, and it would have filled the exact shape of that hole. Perfectly. On purpose. Harry knew what it felt like to be lonely in a specific, architectural way. That knowledge sat in his chest when he thought about Ginny. He needed the diary out of her possession without her knowing he'd taken it, and then he needed to destroy it before whatever plan Lucius had set in motion could fully execute, and then he needed to make absolutely sure Ginny was going to be all right afterward. 3 things. He listed them in the charmed notebook under the heading Priorities and underlined all 3 equally. He went to see Hermione first. She was still in the hospital wing, which was the thing about the polyjuice potion incident that had gone genuinely badly. The cat hair had done something to her that was technically reversible and not dangerous but was requiring medical management of the slow, uncomfortable, very visible kind. She had fur. Not everywhere, but enough. Madame Pomfrey had handled this with extraordinary professional discretion, announcing to any student who asked that Hermione had contracted a complex skin complaint and was resting. She had set up a functional study corner in the hospital wing, because of course she had. Books stacked on both sides of her bed, parchment covered in notes, Crookshanks asleep at her feet and apparently contributing to the general medical situation by making her cat's symptoms feel slightly more contextually appropriate. Harry pulled a chair close and spoke quietly. I think the diary went to Ginny. Hermione put down her book immediately, which was how serious she took it. How certain? Certain enough. He explained the Diagon Alley calculation, Lucius, the bag of used books, Ginny's stack, the timing and opportunity. He put it in her second-hand books before term. She's been carrying it since September, Hermione. She doesn't know what it is. Hermione was quiet for a moment, doing the kind of rapid processing that looked like stillness but wasn't. If she's been using it since September, she said carefully, then whatever influence it has over her is established. It'll have made itself important to her. She won't want to give it up. She looked at him. And she can't know we think she's involved. If she realizes, the diary will know too, because she'll go straight to it. I know. We need to get it when she's not in her room, Hermione said. But girls' dormitories are sealed against boys, Harry said. I know. I'd need a girl to go in. Hermione looked at him steadily. You're not well enough, he said immediately. I'm perfectly mentally functional, she said. I have fur, not a head injury. Madame Pomfrey would notice you leaving. Madame Pomfrey, Hermione said, with the calm certainty of someone who had been planning this for the 40 seconds since the conversation started, leaves this ward at precisely 9 in the evening to do her paperwork in her office. She is back at 9:45. There is a 45-minute window. Harry looked at her. I've been here 2 weeks, she said. I've had nothing to do but observe. You'd need to move fast, and you'd need to know which trunk. First-year girls share a 6-bed dormitory. Ginny is the only Weasley in it, so her trunk is likely identifiable by the hand-me-down quality of her belongings. And by a red-haired pygmy puff, apparently, Ron mentioned she has one. She looked at him over the top of her notes. The diary itself will be either in the trunk or in her bag. If she's using it daily, the bag. Tonight? Harry said. Tomorrow, Hermione said. I need a day to think through the variables. And you need to make sure Ginny is occupied somewhere that isn't the dormitory at 9:15. I can do that. Harry. She stopped him as he pushed back his chair. If she realizes what happened afterward, she will, eventually, she's going to need to understand that we did it for her. Not to her. She looked at him seriously. Make sure Ron is ready to be what she needs him to be when this is over. I'll talk to him, Harry said. He found Ron in the common room that evening staring at a chessboard with no opponent, moving pieces at random with the distracted quality of someone whose brain was occupied elsewhere. Tomorrow night, Harry said, sitting down. 9:15. I need you to get Ginny down to the common room and keep her there until 9:45. Talk about anything. Talk about home. Just keep her there. Ron looked up. His jaw was tight. Is it definite? The diary and Ginny? It's definite enough that I'm not waiting anymore. Right. Ron moved a rook that had no tactical purpose. Put it down. She looked at me at dinner tonight, he said, and she looked the way Mom looks when something's wrong that she can't tell anyone. Like she's been carrying something for too long. He stopped. She's 11, Harry. She's my little sister and she's 11 and something is eating her from the inside and she doesn't know she can ask for help. She's going to be all right, Harry said. You can't promise that. No, Harry agreed. But I can promise we're going to do everything possible to make it true. He held Ron's gaze. That's what I can promise. Ron was quiet for a moment, and then he nodded, the short, decisive nod of someone setting aside the worry in favor of the action. 9:15, Ron said. I'll think of something. The next day had the charged quality of a day where something important was going to happen regardless of how ordinary the hours around it looked. Harry went to classes and paid attention and answered questions in defense that made Lockhart look slightly uncertain without quite understanding why, and ate lunch, and kept Ginny in his peripheral vision throughout, watching her bag, watching how she held it, watching the unconscious way her hand went to it the way you touch a pocket where something important is kept. The bag never left her shoulder. Which was fine. That was expected. At 9:05, Ron appeared in the girls' first-year corridor with a piece of parchment and an expression of urgent brotherly concern, saying he needed to show her something in the common room, something in a letter from Mum, something about Percy. Harry didn't hear the exact pretext because he was already heading in the other direction, moving fast through corridors that were emptying for curfew. Hermione was in the corridor outside the first-year girls' dormitory in her dressing gown, looking slightly more feline than any Hogwarts student should but carrying herself with the composure of someone who had decided the fur was beneath her concern. "Her bag?" Harry said. "Will be by her bed or in her trunk. 30 minutes maximum." She pushed the dormitory door and went in. Harry stood in the corridor and watched the hourglass on the wall and thought about his father's note, "Don't do it alone," and thought, "I'm not." Hermione came back in 11 minutes. She had a small diary. Dark cover. Plain. She held it the way you hold something that you're being careful not to touch more than necessary, with the flat of the fingers rather than the palm, and she looked at Harry when she came out and said, "There's writing in it. In silver ink." And then her responses in normal ink, back and forth, like a conversation. "Like a conversation," Harry said. He took the diary from her and looked at it. Tom Riddle's diary was written on the flyleaf, and the ink inside moved very slightly when you tilted the page, the silver letters shifting with the micro-adjustment of something alive. He closed it. How did she hide it? Inside her pillowcase, Hermione said. Under the pillow. She's been sleeping on it. They looked at each other. I need to destroy it tonight, Harry said. Hermione looked at the diary. Basilisk Fawn. Which means the chamber, Harry said. Which means I do the rest of it now. He looked up at her. I'm not sending you back to the hospital wing to wait. I should think not, she said. I've been waiting for a week already. Can you walk properly? I can run if necessary. Then get dressed properly and meet me at Myrtle's bathroom in 10 minutes, Harry said. Bring your wand. Myrtle's bathroom at 9:30 was dark and wet and unhappy, which tracked. Myrtle herself was present, which Harry hadn't anticipated. She was sitting in the last cubicle, which she left when she heard them come in, floating out through the door with the offended look she always wore when her solitude was interrupted. Nobody ever comes in here except to bother me, she said to Harry specifically, with the precise misery of someone who had perfected their grievance. Then she registered what he was holding and her expression did something complicated. Is that, where did you get that? Harry looked at the diary. You know what this is. Tom showed it to me, she said, and her voice changed, not quite fond, not quite bitter, but some mixture. He used to talk to me. Down here. When he was a student. She drifted slightly closer. He was the only one who ever talked to me. Until he stopped. When did he stop talking to you, Myrtle? Harry asked carefully. When he found the chamber, she said. He came in here one night, my last night, though I didn't know it yet, and he was talking to the sink. That one. She pointed. In that horrible hissy language. And then there was a horrible noise and I was so upset I ran into the stall and I don't really remember what happened after that. She stopped. You died, Harry said gently. Something came out of the sink. I suppose I did, she said, with the philosophical resignation of someone who has had 50 years to make peace with a thing. Are you going to open it? I'm going to try, Harry said. He stood at the third sink and looked at the tap with the serpent pattern and thought about what he was doing, 12 years old, standing in a haunted bathroom with a piece of Voldemort's soul in his pocket and a girl covered in cat fur behind him and a ghost who had been killed by the thing he was about to walk toward, and felt, once again, the specific unafraidness that came from preparation. He hissed. The word in Parseltongue came naturally, no translation in his head first, just the meaning shaped in the snake language his mother had apparently spent considerable effort understanding. She'd written about it in the archive, about the genetic component, about the way it appeared in bloodlines without direct inheritance, about James's complete inability to produce even a passable sibilant, and the sink responded. The pipes shuddered. The sink moved. The basin swung aside on a stone axis, revealing a wide dark pipe that plunged at a steep angle into blackness. Hermione looked into it. "Naturally," she said. "Ladies first," Myrtle offered helpfully, from above them. Harry went first. He sat on the edge of the pipe and pushed off and went down in a rush of cold air and darkness, the pipe curving and dropping in the way of old castle plumbing taken to its logical extreme, depositing him onto a pile of accumulated debris, old bones, small objects, the drowned odds and ends of 50 years of Hogwarts drainage, with a controlled landing that was approximately as ungraceful as the circumstances allowed. Hermione landed behind him and was already up before the echoes finished. The tunnel was dark. Harry cast lumos and the light moved out ahead of them, stone walls, the skeleton of some small animal, the distant suggestion of scale-shaped marks in the dust that he identified from his father's notes as basilisk passage marks. He and Hermione moved quickly, not running but covering ground, through the first tunnel section and then through a passage sealed by a stone door marked with stone serpents that opened for him and through again into the deeper dark. They moved in silence except for the sound of their footsteps and Hermione's careful, controlled breathing, which was the breathing of someone staying focused rather than someone scared. Harry was keeping track of the route by the marks on the walls, cataloging turns and junctions with the automatic precision of someone who'd been told once to always know how to get back. The second gate was larger, an archway with a dozen stone serpents writhing around it, mouths open, and in the center of the arch a sealed section that responded to Harry's hiss with the deep groan of very old stone moving on very old hinges. Beyond it was the chamber. It was vast. Harry had known it would be large, the legend said it, his father's notes said it, but large was not the same as the actual reality of it, the way the ceiling disappeared into darkness, the way the columns rose on either side like the nave of a cathedral built by someone with a very different concept of architecture. Along the columns, carved stone serpents. Down the center, shallow water, standing, not running, the mirror-still kind that reflected the light of his wand back up at them. And at the far end, behind a curtain of water-stained stone, a carved face. Salazar Slytherin. Stone, monumental, not quite human in its proportions, the face of someone who had been legendary long enough that the carving had gone from portrait to symbol. Harry and Hermione stood at the chamber's threshold for exactly 1 second, taking it in. "Split up," Harry said quietly. "I'll look for the fawn. You look for anything useful. Anything that tells us when the basilisk was last active." "The basilisk is alive," Hermione said. "Sleeping," Harry said. "I think. My father's notes said a sleeping basilisk stays dormant without instruction from a parselmouth. The diary is what activates it." He paused. "Which is why I need the fawn before I destroy the diary. Once the diary is gone, the basilisk is just an animal. An enormous, lethal, snake-shaped animal." "A dormant enormous lethal snake-shaped animal," Harry said. "Don't look at it directly if it moves." "Your pocket mirror." "Already out," Harry said, and he was, the small square mirror from his first-year kit, held at the angle that would show him the reflection of the space ahead. They moved into the chamber. The water was cold against his shoes. The columns rose around him, the silence the particular weight of a very large space that has been empty for a long time. Harry moved toward the far end, the Slytherin statue face, the source point, the place the basilisk would have emerged from because his father's notes described it as emerging from the statue's mouth, checking the mirror constantly, moving with the care of someone who was paying attention to every angle. He found the fawn in the 3rd minute. Not attached to anything living. A shed fawn, enormous, slightly curved, still carrying the faint dark iridescence of basilisk venom even shed. It was half buried in the silt at the base of one of the columns, the remnant of something sloughed off in a previous year, and when Harry picked it up with his free hand he felt the venom warmth even through his robes. He had the antidote in his bag, His father's archive had included 3 vials of basilisk venom antidote in a specifically labeled section of the potion storage, and Harry had taken them on Sharprock's advice about the archive inventory. He pocketed 1 vial in his breast pocket where he could reach it one-handed. He turned toward the center of the chamber, Fong in one hand, mirror in the other, diary in his front pocket. "Ready," Hermione said from somewhere to his left, materializing from between 2 columns. Harry took the diary out. Set it on the flat top of a low stone outcrop that might have been an altar or might have been a random piece of debris. Opened it to the first page. The silver writing immediately appeared. It flowed across the page with the fluid speed of something active, something aware. "You came to the chamber," it wrote. "I didn't think you'd find it." Harry looked at the words and felt the genuine quality of what was communicating with him, not just writing, not just ink. Something that was Tom Riddle at 16, preserved in paper and malice and the terrible ingenuity of a boy who had understood magic well enough to store himself in it. He picked up the basilisk Fong. The writing changed instantly. "Don't." Urgent, the silver letters pressing harder into the page. "You don't understand what I am. What I know. I could tell you things. Things your father never finished researching. Things Dumbledore never told you, you probably could," Harry said to the diary, out loud, because speaking to it felt more honest than writing back. "And most of it would be true, which is the part that makes you dangerous." He looked at the page. "You're a piece of Voldemort. You're the piece that knows how to be charming enough that people don't destroy you immediately. That's your specific function, isn't it?" The writing hesitated. "Then, you're smarter than I expected." "I get that a lot," Harry said, and drove the Fong through the diary's cover. The response was immediate and violent, ink, black and thick, erupting from the puncture wound like something under enormous pressure, flooding the surface of the stone. The diary writhed, physically, the pages thrashing against the stone with the muscular urgency of something organic. Harry drove the Fong in again, and again, 4 punctures in rapid succession, each one drawing more of the black ink blood, each one accompanied by a sound that should not have come from paper but did, a high thin sound that rose and fell and faded. Then it stopped. The diary lay still. The ink spread and thinned and went flat. The pages settled. Harry straightened up. His hand was steady. He felt the venom warmth on his fingers from handling the Fong and pressed the antidote vial to the skin preemptively, just in case. The stopper came out with a soft pop and the liquid was cool and clean. Hermione, standing 3 feet away, had one hand pressed over her mouth. Not from horror, he thought, from the complexity of what they'd just seen. The act of it. The reality of something that had killed people and destroyed the fragment of a monster, over now in 30 seconds in cold water and torchlight. "It's done," Harry said. "It's done," she agreed, quietly. Above them, somewhere in the distant stone of the basilisk's nest, something stirred. A slow, ancient movement, the way a very large thing moves when it hasn't moved in some time. The sound of scale against stone. Harry held up the mirror. In the reflection, the basilisk's head emerged from between 2 columns, enormous, crested, moving with the dignified slowness of something that had no evolutionary reason to hurry. Its eyes were closed. It was not seeking prey. It was waking up, but directionless, purposeless, the connection to the diary severed. Harry hissed at it. The sound came out long and low and specifically shaped, and the basilisk stopped. Its head turned toward him. In the mirror, he could see the enormous wedge-shaped head tracking his voice with the patience of an animal responding to the only language that had ever made sense. He said, in Parseltongue, "Sleep. There is nothing for you here. Sleep." A long pause. The basilisk settled. The massive coils shifted once, twice, and then went still, the heavy patience of a creature with nothing to act on, returning to its default state. Hermione breathed out slowly. "That," she said, "was something." "We need to go," Harry said. "We need to get back to Ginny." Ginny was still in the common room when they came through the portrait hole at 11:20, Ron sitting across from her with the chessboard between them and the particular expression of a person who has been holding a conversation running entirely on willpower for 2 hours. Ginny looked up when Harry and Hermione came in, and something in her face was different already, a lightness, something unclenched. As though the weight of something had shifted without her knowing why. Harry sat down beside her. Ron was watching him with a question he couldn't ask out loud. Harry nodded slightly. Ron closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and said, very casually, "Want to finish this game?" "I had you." "You absolutely did not have me," Ginny said. "I had your knight." "My knight was sacrificial, Ron, that's basic." Harry sat back and let them argue about chess. He watched Ginny's face and saw, yes, there it was, the slow, gradual brightening of someone whose mind has been partially returned to them without knowing it happened. She didn't know why she felt better. She might have a headache tomorrow, might feel confused, might have gaps that were going to be frightening when she examined them. But she was present in a way she hadn't been for months. He'd deal with the explanation later. Carefully. Kindly. She deserved to know what had happened to her, and she deserved to hear it from someone who understood it rather than from rumor or official report. "Ginny," he said. She looked at him. First-year girl's uncertainty, still, she didn't know him well, and he was famous Harry Potter, which he gathered was complicated to navigate when you were 11 and had 6 older brothers. "You're going to feel strange for a few days," he said quietly, while Ron examined the chessboard. "Like some of your memories don't quite connect. That's normal, and it's going to pass." He held her eyes. "If something feels wrong, you come to me or Ron or Hermione. All right?" She stared at him. "I'll explain properly when there's time," he said. "I promise." Her eyes went uncertain in the way that meant she was pressing back questions. Then she nodded, once, small and decisive. "Okay," she said. The school's reaction to the end of the attacks was gradual and then sudden. Mrs. Norris's petrifaction was reversed. Colin Creevey was unpetrified, came back from the hospital wing chattering, and immediately asked Harry if he could take his photograph, which suggested full recovery. Justin Finch-Fletchley was unpetrified and spent a day looking thoughtful about having been suspicious of Harry, which Harry accepted graciously because the boy had been operating on limited information. Harry told nobody what had happened. Not Lockhart, who attempted on the 3rd day after the attack stopped to write a school notice claiming the threat had been neutralized by his expert intervention. Not Dumbledore, who called Harry to his office on a Thursday afternoon with the measured concern of someone who knows more than they're revealing. Dumbledore's office was the same as first year, the same whirring instruments, the same portrait-lined walls, the same peculiar quality of warmth that the man generated simply by being in a room. Fawkes was on his perch, this year's bird a deep red gold at the full of his burning cycle, and he looked at Harry with the golden eyes of a creature that was thinking something complicated. Harry sat down in the chair across from the desk and waited. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment with those remarkable blue eyes and the expression of someone making a very careful assessment that they were keeping largely to themselves. "The attacks have stopped," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry said. "You appear to know more about this than you did a week ago," Dumbledore said. Not an accusation. Just stated, the way Dumbledore always stated things that most people would have made into accusations. "I've been reading," Harry said. "My parents left quite a library." The pause between them was different from the pauses Harry had experienced with other adults. It wasn't the pause of uncertainty or gathering anger, it was the pause of a man whose mind was working very fast and choosing, with great care, what to say next. "Your parents left you many things," Dumbledore said finally, and his voice had something in it that was genuine, not the performance of care, but the actual thing, the complicated grief of someone who had known James and Lily Potter and had carried the weight of their deaths for 11 years. "I hope you found value in what they left." "Enormous value," Harry said. He held the old man's gaze steadily. "They were extraordinary people." They were. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, looking at Harry with something that was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable to sit under, the look of someone seeing multiple things at once and integrating them. "Harry. Are you all right?" The question was real. That was the thing about Dumbledore, even now, with everything Harry knew, the care in the question was real. He genuinely wanted to know. He would have genuinely done something about it if the answer had been no. "I'm very well," Harry said. "Thank you for asking. If there is anything, I know where your office is," Harry said pleasantly. "I'll come if I need to." Another pause. Fawkes ruffled his feathers gently and settled. "I understand," Dumbledore said softly, "that you have been conducting affairs independently this year." Harry was careful to keep his face neutral. "I've been taking an interest in my own life," he said. "I hope that's all right." "Of course," Dumbledore said. And then, with a gentleness that was somehow more serious than anything else he'd said, "You must know that everything I have done has been done with your well-being in mind." "I know that," Harry said. And he did. He had said it to Ron and to Hermione and he meant it, the genuine belief, the sincere intent. He wasn't here to have that particular argument, not yet, not without the full documentation, not without the complete picture. "Good," Dumbledore said. Something in him had relaxed slightly. He had heard the acknowledgement and taken it as, not forgiveness, not quite, but the absence of outright war. "Then I hope second year continues to improve." "I expect it will," Harry said, and stood up and took his leave. He was in the corridor outside the office, heading back toward the tower, thinking about the archive and the remaining sections of his mother's notes and the list of properties that he'd been quietly researching in the Hogwarts library between other tasks, when someone fell into step beside him. Not someone he expected. Draco Malfoy, walking fast, alone, with the particular expression of someone who has recently made a decision that surprised them and is carrying it with aggressive confidence to compensate. Harry waited. "The attack stopped," Draco said. "They did. You did something." Not a question. Not quite an accusation. The observation of someone who had been watching the situation with his father's trained attention and had arrived at a conclusion. "I handled a problem," Harry said. Draco was quiet for 3 steps. "My father gave that diary to Weasley's sister. He said it the way you say something you need to say out loud before you know what you think of it. I didn't know he was going to do that. I knew he had an old object, I knew it was dark, but I didn't know he was going to put it with a first-year girl." Harry looked at him sideways. "Does it make a difference? The age?" Draco's jaw worked. "Yes," he said, which cost him something. "What do you want, Malfoy?" "I want to know what my father is doing." He said it with a fierceness that was more honest than almost anything Harry had heard from him. "He doesn't explain. He plans and executes and I find out afterward or I don't find out at all. And whatever he had in that diary, whatever it was going to do to the school," he stopped. "It wasn't just politics. I understand politics. That was something else." "Yes," Harry said. "It was." "What was it?" Harry thought about it. About how much to say to Draco Malfoy, who was the son of Lucius and had been raised in one direction and had never had any particular reason to look at what was being built for him. About the difference between ally and informant and asset. About the green notebook at his father's research desk and the crossed-out idea that had been uncrossed because it was directionally correct. "Your father used a fragment of Voldemort's soul," Harry said, keeping his voice level. "Stored in a diary. He gave it to an 11-year-old girl who he calculated would be vulnerable to it. It would have opened the Chamber of Secrets and used her as its instrument, and when enough students had been attacked, it would have gained enough strength to manifest. And your father would have been positioned to look horrified while the school descended into chaos." Draco had stopped walking. Harry stopped too and looked at him. Draco's face had gone through several things very quickly, most of them too fast to identify. What settled was not the performance of being a Malfoy but the actual reaction of someone who has just understood something that changes the structure of their world. "A soul fragment," Draco said. Preserved in an object. Riddle's diary. Harry waited. Your father knew what it was. Yes, Draco said. Very quietly. He would have. They stood in the corridor. Distant voices, the school moving around them. Why are you telling me this? Draco asked. Because you asked a direct question, Harry said. And because you said it made a difference. The age. He looked at Draco steadily. I think it makes a difference to you more than you've had room to work out yet. And I think, he paused, choosing carefully, that knowing things accurately is more useful than not knowing them. Draco was still processing. Something in his face had the quality of new air in a closed room, uncomfortable, necessary, the sensation of reoxygenation. My father is not, he stopped. Started again. I am not my father. I know, Harry said. And then, because he believed it and because it seemed important for Draco to hear it from someone, that's up to you. He walked on. After a moment, he heard Draco's footsteps heading in the opposite direction. Heading toward the dungeons, Harry thought, toward the Slytherin common room and whatever interior accounting Draco was doing in the private vault of his own head. Harry turned the corner toward Gryffindor Tower. In his pocket, the charmed notebook. In his inner pocket, the remaining antidote vials. In the deeper pocket of his memory, the smell of the archive and his father's handwriting and his mother's marginal corrections and the slow, growing architecture of everything he now understood about his own life. The diary was destroyed. The chamber was closed. Ginny was going to be all right. Tom Riddle's 16-year-old fragment was dissolved in black ink on the chamber floor. But his father's notes had used the word fragment with the plural in mind, had written such an object suggests a pattern, not a singularity, the kind of mind that creates more than one, and Harry had understood, on first reading, exactly what that meant. Tom Riddle hadn't made one. He climbed the stairs toward Gryffindor Tower with that knowledge settled in him the way important things settled, not panic, not urgency, but the clear awareness of a long game and the patience to play it correctly. He had time. He had resources. He had his parents' research and Hermione's formidable mind and Ron's straight-line loyalty and an account manager at Gringotts who was personally offended on behalf of proper banking procedure. He had more than Tom Riddle's fragment had expected him to have. That, for now, was enough. Chapter 5, The Reckoning. The last week of term arrived the way last weeks always did at Hogwarts, in a rush of suddenly remembered assignments and exam preparation and the specific social chaos of 300 students collectively realizing they hadn't done everything they'd intended to do since September. The castle ran warm with it, the corridors fuller than usual, the library operating at capacity, Hermione fully discharged from the hospital wing and moving through the academic sprint with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting 2 weeks to get back to full speed. Harry let the week happen around him. He did his work. He sat his end-of-year exams with the quiet thoroughness of someone who had spent the year reading well beyond the curriculum, and the results showed in ways that he kept deliberately unremarkable, not perfect, not outstanding in the way that would draw comment, just consistently better than expected in a pattern that suggested application rather than something harder to explain. Hermione noticed anyway, because Hermione always noticed, but she kept it between them in the way they'd learned to keep things between them this year. He was waiting for something. He hadn't told the others exactly what, because the shape of it hadn't fully declared itself until the morning of the second-to-last day, when Sharprock's owl arrived at the Ollery rather than the post box, addressed in the specific urgent shorthand that Sharprock used when something time-sensitive had broken. Harry read it standing up in the cold morning Ollery with the smell of hay and feathers around him and Hedwig watching him from her perch with her particular knowing expression. Mr. Potter, 2 developments requiring your immediate attention before term ends. First, a formal complaint has been filed with the Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement regarding the management of the Potter estate accounts. The complaint has been filed by this office, on behalf of Gringotts Bank, citing the unauthorized use of Provision 14C and the subsequent irregular transactions of 1985 and 1988. The complaint is currently with the head of the DMLE and will be publicly registered within 7 days. Second, we have located, through our estate documentation review, a property in your name that was not included in the original custodianship filing. Potter Cottage, Godric's Hollow. The property was placed under a ministry preservation order in November 1981 and has been maintained under that order since. The preservation order was filed by APWB Dumbledore in his capacity as a Wisengamot member. The property has not been listed in any accounting provided to you. You may wish to make decisions regarding these developments before returning to your guardians for the summer. Sharprock Harry read it twice. Folded it. Put it in his inner pocket. Then he stood in the Ollery for a moment and looked out through the high window at the grounds, the lake silver in the morning light, the forbidden forest dark at its edges, the sky above it wide and clear. The end-of-year quality of everything. The particular poignancy of a place that is about to be left for 3 months. Potter Cottage. His parents' house. The house where it happened. Dumbledore had filed the preservation order. Had kept it in his own name, outside the estate accounting, outside anything Sharprock had been given access to until the full estate review turned it up. Maybe it had seemed like protection. Maybe it genuinely was protection, keeping the site safe, keeping it from being sold or disturbed or turned into a tourist attraction, which Harry suspected it would have been. 1981, the night Voldemort fell, had become the thing the wizarding world built its recovery on, and the cottage at the center of it would have drawn people. None of which meant Dumbledore had the right to manage it without telling him. He was 12 years old and he owned a ruined house in Godric's Hollow and he'd never been told. He came down from the Ollery and found Hermione and Ron at breakfast, and he sat down and poured himself tea and ate toast with an equanimity that he felt genuinely, because the anger, the sharp clean anger that Sharprock's letter warranted, had already passed through him and settled into something more useful. Resolve. The clear-eyed readiness of someone who knows what they're going to do and has decided to do it well rather than loudly. "We need to talk tonight," he said. Ron looked up from his eggs. Hermione looked up from her book. They read his expression and put things down. After dinner, Hermione said. "The corner table in the library closes at 9. We can have it until then." "Good," Harry said. They took the corner table at 7:30, the 3 of them, with the particular configuration they'd fallen into over the year, Harry opposite the door so he could see whoever came in, Hermione with her back to the shelf so she had maximum table space, Ron beside Harry where he could watch both of them and the room at once. The library was quiet this late, the last few students wrapping up and leaving, Madame Pants making her final circuit of the stacks. Harry told them about the letter. Both developments. All of it. Ron was very still throughout, in the way that meant he was furious and keeping it internal while he processed, a quality Harry had noticed Ron had developed over the course of the year, less immediate, more considered. The chamber had done that, Harry thought. You can't spend a year this close to something real and urgent without it changing how you sit with information. Hermione was already thinking 3 steps ahead. He could see it. "The ministry complaint is the most important part," she said, when he'd finished. Gringotts filing formally means it becomes a matter of official record. Once it's registered it can't be suppressed without ministry interference, which would itself be a criminal act. She paused. Dumbledore has enormous influence in the ministry. But the DMLE head, Amelia Bones, she has a reputation for being genuinely independent. If the complaint lands on her desk before anyone can redirect it, Sharprock said 7 days, Harry said. It may already be there. Then we're already in motion, Hermione said. The question is what you do with that. I'm going to talk to Dumbledore before I leave for the summer, Harry said. Tomorrow morning. Both of them looked at him. Not to fight, Harry said. Not to accuse. I want to have a real conversation while I still have the choice to have it on my terms, before the ministry complaint becomes public and it becomes something else. He looked at the table. He deserves to know what's coming. And I want to look at him when he finds out. Ron said, That's cold. Is it? Harry considered it. I don't think it's cold. I think it's honest. I'm not ambushing him with lawyers and Gringotts officials. I'm going to his office and telling him what I know and giving him the chance to respond as himself. He looked up at Ron. That's more than he gave me. Ron thought about it. Fair, he said. There's something else, Harry said. He'd been sitting with this part for most of the day, turning it over, finding its edges. Sirius Black. Hermione's been building a file. Hermione produced a folder from her bag with the practiced ease of someone who had prepared for this exact moment. She opened it on the table, parchment covered in her precise handwriting, newspaper clippings from the archived Prophet issues she'd found in the library, a summary sheet at the front. Sirius Orain Black, she said. Convicted in November 1981 of the murders of 12 Muggles and the betrayal of James and Lily Potter to Voldemort. Sentenced to Azkaban for life. She looked at her notes. Here's what I can't find, the trial record. I've been through the Ministry's published convictions in the Prophet archive going back to 1975. Major Death Eater trials are all listed. Bellatrix Lestrange, convicted 1981, listed. Evan Rosier, killed resisting arrest 1981, noted. Sirius Black, not listed. Not anywhere. Ron looked at the folder. He wasn't tried. He was taken directly to Azkaban on Bartemius Crouch Sr.'s personal authority, which he had as head of the DMLE during wartime emergency powers. Those powers allowed for direct incarceration without trial in cases of imminent threat. She looked at Harry. But there's no record of the evidence that designated him an imminent threat. And the emergency powers had a mandatory review clause. Within 6 months, every wartime incarceration had to be formally reviewed by the Wisengamot and either confirmed with evidence or reversed. She paused. There's no review record for Sirius Black. So he's just, in there, Ron said. He's just in there, Hermione confirmed. Based on Crouch's word, which was never reviewed, and circumstantial evidence that was never formally presented, because there was never a trial to present it at. She closed the folder. And your parents will name him as your legal guardian, Harry. Which means that if the incarceration is invalid, the Provision 14c justification for the custodianship falls apart even further. Because there would have been a valid guardian available. Dumbledore would have known there was no trial, Harry said. The sentence sat on the table between them. Yes, Hermione said. He would have. This was the thing that didn't collapse into simple narrative. Dumbledore the brilliant, Dumbledore the genuinely caring, Dumbledore the man who had signed himself in as Harry's guardian and reorganized the estate and paid the Dursleys and had done all of it out of a sincere conviction that he was protecting the boy who needed to survive, had also either known that Sirius Black was in Azkaban without a trial, or had never asked. And Harry couldn't work out which was worse, the knowing or the not asking. I'm going to pursue his release, Harry said. However long it takes, whatever it costs. That's a decision I'm making now. He looked at the folder. Can we get the file to Amelia Bones along with the Gringotts complaint? Sharprock would need to include it in the formal filing, Hermione said. But if you write to him tonight and he hasn't submitted yet, Harry was already pulling out his charmed notebook. Dumbledore's office in the morning. Harry climbed the gargoyle staircase at 8:30, when the castle was moving into its pre-breakfast rhythm and the headmaster's office was most likely to be accessible and unoccupied by staff. He knocked, and the response was immediate. Either Dumbledore had known he was coming, which was possible, or he was an early riser, which was also likely. Come in, Harry. The office had the morning quality of any room with tall windows when the summer sun is at the right angle, gold and warm, the instruments catching the light, the portraits on the walls either awake and watching or pretending to be asleep with variable conviction. Fawkes was brilliant this morning, the height of his cycle, red gold and luminous on his perch, watching Harry with the patient depth of something very old. Dumbledore was behind his desk with tea and a small plate of biscuits and the serene expression of a man who had been working since before the sun came up. He looked at Harry and he smiled, the genuine one, not the public version, not the performance, but the actual thing, the smile that reached the blue eyes. Sit down, he said. Tea. Thank you, Harry said, because declining it would have made the conversation more adversarial from the first moment, and he wasn't here for adversarial. He sat. He took the tea. He held the cup in both hands for a moment and looked at Dumbledore and said, simply, I know about the custodianship. The pause was very brief. Briefer than Harry had expected. Dumbledore's control was remarkable. What shifted in his expression was something subtle, a closing, not of the warmth, but of something like prepared certainty, the adjustment of a man who had kept a door closed for a long time and was now hearing a knock. Tell me what you know, Dumbledore said, and his voice was gentle. Which was the right move, Harry thought. The wrong move would have been to deny. I received the Gringotts inheritance key in July, Harry said. I visited Gringotts. I met with Sharprock, the senior account manager. He showed me the custodianship documentation, your signature, the provision 14C filing, the date discrepancy in the original application. The expense account. He paused. The payments to the Dursleys. Dumbledore was watching him with the careful attention of someone listening for more than the words. I spent the summer in the family archive, Harry continued. My parents' research notes. The estate registry. I've been reading since July. He set down his teacup. I know about Sirius Black. Something in Dumbledore's eyes changed. I know he was named as my guardian in my parents' will, Harry said. I know he was sent to Azkaban without a trial. And I know that you were aware of both of those things when you filed the Provision 14C appointment. The room was very quiet. Fawkes made a soft sound, not quite a note, more like the preparation for one. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was still gentle, but it had a different quality now, the gentleness of something opened rather than something performed. I owe you an explanation, he said. Yes, Harry said. You do. In November 1981, Dumbledore began, the wizarding world was in a state that I'm not sure I can adequately describe to someone who didn't live through it. Voldemort had fallen, but no one was certain it was permanent. His supporters were either fleeing, denying, or being rounded up in circumstances that were not always orderly. Bartemius Crouch was operating with emergency powers that I had myself voted to grant him, because we believed, at that moment, that swiftness was necessary. He paused. Sirius Black was arrested at a scene involving 12 dead Muggles and a confrontation with Peter Pettigrew. Pettigrew, Harry said. The name was in his father's notes, Remus Lupin, Sirius Black, Peter Pettigrew, for names that appeared together in the Marauders' correspondence he'd read in the personal correspondence trunk. 4 friends. Pettigrew was believed killed. His body was never recovered. A finger was found. Dumbledore looked at Harry steadily. Sirius was taken directly to Azkaban. In the chaos of those days, he paused, and what Harry saw in his face was the specific discomfort of a man confronting a decision he had justified at the time and had never fully re-examined. I did not push for a trial. I believed the evidence. I believed the scene. And I had the matter of you to manage, a child who needed protection, who needed to be placed safely, so you placed me with the Dursleys, Harry said. Using a guardianship you appointed yourself to, funded by my own estate, without asking Sirius Black whether he was actually guilty. Yes, Dumbledore said. Simply. Without defense. Harry looked at him. At the genuineness in the lined face, the absence of evasion. This was the thing he'd been trying to prepare for and hadn't quite managed to fully prepare for, Dumbledore telling the truth with the same quality of sincerity he used for everything else, because he was not a liar. He was something more complicated than a liar. Why the Dursleys specifically? Harry asked. Of all the places. Your mother's sacrifice created a blood protection, Dumbledore said. A profound one, the willingness to die for love created a protective enchantment around you keyed to her bloodline. As long as you lived with family connected to her blood, the protection held. It would have prevented Voldemort, in whatever form he retained, from touching you." He met Harry's eyes. "It was genuine protection, Harry. I want you to understand that." "I understand it," Harry said. "I've read my parents' research on intent-based blood magic. I understand the mechanism." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "I also understand that you could have explained this to me at any point. At 11. At 12. At any moment since I've been old enough to understand it." He paused. "You chose not to." Dumbledore was quiet. "You made decisions about my life and you kept them from me," Harry said. "The estate. The guardianship. Sirius. The blood protection. The fact that I live with people who have been paid, from my own inheritance, to tolerate my presence." He wasn't raising his voice. He'd known he wasn't going to raise his voice, and the knowing had been right. There was no anger in him right now, just clarity, the clean cold feeling of a thing stated exactly as it is. "You made those decisions because you believed you knew what was best for me. And I think you were right about some of them. The blood protection was real. Placing me somewhere Voldemort couldn't reach me was the right call in 1981. He tilted his head. "But you never stopped managing me, did you? Even after the immediate danger passed. Even now." Dumbledore was looking at him with an expression that Harry had never seen on him before. Not the warm benevolence. Not the knowing twinkle. Something more stripped than that. The expression of someone seeing themselves from outside, perhaps for the first time in a long while. "No," Dumbledore said. "I did not." "Why not?" A long silence. "Because," Dumbledore said, and the word came out slowly, like something heavy being moved from a place where it had rested for years, "you are important in ways that I have never told you. There is a prophecy, Harry. Made before your birth. It concerns you and Voldemort, and its implications are significant. I have protected you in the way that one protects something precious and necessary, something the world cannot afford to lose." He paused. "I am aware that I have, in doing so, failed to see you." The word landed very quietly. "Failed to see you." Harry sat with it. He'd expected the prophecy. His father's notes had an oblique reference to it, a fragment from a conversation James had clearly had with Dumbledore in early 1980, underlined twice with a comment in the margin, "He doesn't tell us everything. Lily suspects there is more. I believe her." He'd been waiting for Dumbledore to bring it, and here it was, offered as context and perhaps as explanation, and Harry looked at it for what it was, true, real, and not an excuse. "I'd like to hear the prophecy," Harry said. "In time," Dumbledore said. "Now," Harry said. Quietly. Firmly. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into a drawer and produced a small glass sphere, a remembrable shape, but different in quality, the mist inside moving with the specific pattern of stored memory, and set it on the desk between them. "It was made by Sybil Trelawney, in an interview for the Divination Post, in the presence of myself and only myself," he said. "In January 1980. Harry leaned forward and touched the sphere, and the mist moved, and he heard a voice, not Trelawney's usual dreamy classroom voice but something deeper, rougher, the voice of something using her rather than her speaking, and the words were clear and specific and, now that Harry had spent a year reading his parents' research and his father's notes on intent-based magic, made a kind of terrible structural sense. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives." Harry sat back. The sphere's mist settled. He thought about it for a moment. About what it meant, what it actually said, the specific language of prophecy that his mother had written about once in a note marked theoretical. Prophecies are conditional on action, not absolute. The branch of magic that deals in possible futures has no mechanism for certainty, they are maps of probability not inevitability. "Power the Dark Lord knows not," Harry said. "Yes. My mother thought that was love, Harry said. I read her research. Dumbledore's expression shifted, and for the first time in the conversation it moved into something that was straightforwardly emotional, surprised, moved, the particular quality of someone who has just been told that someone they loved understood something important. She did, he said. We spoke about it. He paused. She was right. I think she was right too, Harry said. But I also think the prophecy doesn't require me to know nothing, to have nothing, to go into whatever this is blind and alone and dependent on you to point me at the right target. He looked at Dumbledore directly. I think my parents left me exactly the tools I need. I think the archive exists because my father thought someone might need it. I think my mother's research is there because she understood the magic well enough to prepare for it. He paused. I'm not going to be managed into readiness. I'm going to get ready myself. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Fawkes made the note that isn't a note again, and both of them looked at him briefly, and the Phoenix regarded them both with the level attention of something that has watched a great deal of human drama from its perch and found it consistently worth attending to. You remind me of your mother, Dumbledore said softly. More than I've told you. More than I've allowed myself to say, perhaps. What was she like? Harry said. The question came out before he'd decided to ask it, which was fine. It was a real question, the most real one he'd asked today. And Dumbledore, for the first time in the conversation, was simply answering rather than managing. She was brilliant and impatient and deeply kind, Dumbledore said, and she had the specific quality of a person who believes in doing things correctly, not because rules are sacrosanct, but because most rules exist for good reasons and ignoring them without understanding them is careless. She would have had several pointed observations about how I've handled your accounts. A pause. Your father, on the other hand, would have organized a theatrical confrontation for maximum effect. He really would have, Harry said. He felt something that was not quite a smile but lived near one. How did you get to Gringotts? Dumbledore asked. In July. Train, Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. Muggle, train. From Little Whinging. Then the Underground. Harry watched Dumbledore process this, the extraordinary image of Harry Potter navigating the London Tube at 12 years old and his cousin's hand-me-downs to visit his bank account. You didn't think in Muggle. None of your network did. It was the one direction nobody was watching. A long pause. Then Dumbledore made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh. Small, genuine, the slightly pained laugh of someone who has just understood the geometry of their own blind spot. No, he said. I suppose we didn't. The conversation went on for another 40 minutes. Harry laid out the full picture, not to wound, but because it was a real accounting and it needed to be stated completely. The irregular transactions. The Provision 14C expiry that Hermione had identified. The payment structure to the Dursleys. The preservation order on Godric's Hollow. The estate properties that had been sitting empty for a decade that Harry was now, legally and practically, in a position to manage. Dumbledore listened. He asked questions that were genuine, not deflection, not management, just someone who needed information to understand the full extent of what he had and hadn't done. When he asked about Sirius Black, his voice had a quality that Harry recognized as guilt without quite being willing to name itself. I will support a review of his case, Dumbledore said. Fully. Whatever access to my testimony or documentation is needed. If Sirius was incarcerated without proper process, he stopped. He was my student. He was James's dearest friend. If I allowed his imprisonment through inaction, you did, Harry said. Not cruelly. Exactly as it was. Yes. Quieter. I did. Then supporting the review is the right thing, Harry said. The Gringotts complaint was the next thing. Harry told him about it in the same level tone, formal complaint filed, ministry registration within 7 days, Amelia Bones the receiving officer. He watched Dumbledore's face as each element landed. There was no attempt to say it was unfair. No attempt to position or deflect. Dumbledore, when he was not performing, had the quality of someone who could look at a thing clearly. The Wisingamot will become involved, Dumbledore said. The Ministry complaint will draw attention from people who will not approach it charitably. I know, Harry said. That's partly why I'm telling you now. If the complaint becomes public and you haven't heard it from me first, it looks like I'm attacking you. I'm not attacking you. He paused. I'm correcting a situation that was wrong. There's a difference. There is, Dumbledore said. Though the distinction may be lost on some. Then I'll work on making it clear, Harry said. I'm 12. People will assume someone put me up to it. Nobody will assume a 12-year-old took a Muggle train to London, spent the summer in a family archive, and built a documented case against the most powerful wizard in Britain. He held Dumbledore's eyes. Which means we have a window before anyone understands what's actually happening. What would you like that window to look like? Dumbledore asked, and Harry recognized the question for what it was, not concession, not yet, but the opening of a genuine negotiation. Harry had prepared for this. He reached into his inner pocket and produced a folded page, the list he'd written in the charmed notebook 3 days ago, the one that had taken him 2 hours of careful thought and 2 drafts and Hermione's review and 1 crucial addition from Ron that had improved it considerably. He put it on the desk. The custodianship is formally closed, he said. That's already done through Gringotts. The payments to the Dursleys stop immediately, also already done. He watched Dumbledore nod, once. The estate properties are under my management. Sharprock's team will handle the practical administration, but decisions come to me. Another nod. Godric's Hollow. I want to visit it. A pause. That will require preparation, when I'm ready, Harry said. I'm not going this summer. But I want the preservation order transferred to my name and I want a full property survey. He paused. It's my parents' house. It should be mine to decide what happens to it. Yes, Dumbledore said. It should. Sirius Black's case goes to Bones immediately. I want your written testimony supporting the review, submitted within 30 days, and I want a copy sent to Sharprock's office. Agreed, Dumbledore said. Quietly, but without hesitation. The prophecy. Harry looked at him. I want the full text in writing, witnessed by Fawkes as a magical witness. He'd read about Phoenix witness sealing in the archive, another thing his mother had annotated, and sealed in my post box at Gringotts. Not so I can use it against you. So I have it and I know I have it and it's not something that only exists in your office. The longest pause. Dumbledore looked at him. At 12-year-old Harry Potter sitting across the desk with his hands flat on the armrests and his eyes level and his voice perfectly, genuinely calm, making requests that were reasonable and documented and fair. Your mother, he said, would be furious with me. Probably, Harry said. Do we have an agreement? Fawkes made a sound. A real note this time, clear and carrying, the kind that went through you rather than past you, a sound with depth to it. Both of them looked at him. The Phoenix regarded them with golden equanimity and made the sound once more, shorter, the punctuation of something confirmed. We have an agreement, Dumbledore said. He found Ron and Hermione in the great hall at breakfast, and the look on his face when he sat down told them enough that neither of them asked immediately. Ron poured him tea with the silent efficiency of a good friend, and Hermione put a piece of toast on his plate, and they ate for a few minutes in the comfortable quiet of people who don't need to fill every moment with sound. How was it? Ron asked eventually. Complicated, Harry said. He's genuinely remorseful about some of it. He picked up his toast. He's also going to take 6 months to fully understand how much he's been doing wrong, because that's how people work, and he'll probably slide back into managing things by instinct before he properly catches it. He paused. But we have a written agreement. Witnessed by Fawkes. Ron stared at him. You got a Phoenix witnessed agreement. I'd read about it in Mum's notes. A phoenix will only witness something both parties mean. Harry ate some toast. So now we both know it's binding. Hermione had her hand pressed over her mouth, which was the expression she got when something had exceeded her already high expectations. Amelia Bones, she said, with the urgency of someone returning to the important thread. If she gets both the estate complaint and the black case file simultaneously, she will, Harry said. Sharprock confirmed last night he can include it. It's going in today. He looked between them. This is the start of it, not the end. Bones receives the file and the complaint, and then there are weeks of process, ministry investigation, Wisingamot review of the provision 14C legality, the black case separate and longer, probably. None of it is fast. But it's moving, Hermione said. It's moving, Harry confirmed. Ron had been watching Harry throughout this, and when the summary was done he said, "How are you?" "Not the plan." "You." Harry thought about it honestly, because Ron was the one who asked that question and meant it purely, and deserved an honest answer. "I'm good," he said. "Actually good. Not performed good." He considered how to say the rest of it. "I sat in that office and I looked at him, and he's not a villain. He's a brilliant man who loves the wizarding world and loves me in his way, and who has been so certain he knows the right answer for so long that he stopped checking." He looked at his tea. "That's the thing I was most afraid of, actually. That I'd get in there and it'd be simple, that he'd be cruel or calculated or cold and I could just be angry at him." He shook his head. "He's not any of those things. He's Dumbledore. And he still managed my life without asking me." "Both of those things can be true," Hermione said. "Yeah," Harry said. "That's what I mean. That's why it's complicated." The great hall was filling up around them, the end-of-year noise, the anticipation of going home, the bittersweet energy of a year ending. Harry looked down the table at the Gryffindors packing up the last of their school things, at Neville Longbottom laughing at something Dean had said, at Ginny Weasley 3 seats down eating actual breakfast for the first time in weeks, color in her face, her hair catching the morning light. She looked up and caught his eye, and the look she gave him was complicated in the way of someone who had been told part of an explanation and was holding the rest of her questions until she felt ready to ask them. There was something in the look that was also gratitude, the kind that didn't know how to be said yet and was communicating itself through eye contact instead. Harry nodded at her. She nodded back and returned to her breakfast. "I have a question," Ron said, dropping his voice. "More of a practical question." "Go ahead." "Your parents' house. Godric's Hollow." He said it carefully. "Are you going to go?" "Yes," Harry said. "Not yet. Maybe next summer. I want to go properly, knowing the full history, knowing what the protections are, knowing what I'm walking into." He paused. "And I want to go with people, not alone." "Obviously we're coming," Hermione said, with the specific tone of someone who has never considered any alternative. "Obviously," Ron agreed. "Obviously," Harry said. And it was, genuinely, obvious, that was the thing that had changed between July and now. He knew who he was going with. He knew who he trusted. He had spent a year learning the difference between the people who had made decisions about his life and the people who had sat with him inside his life, and the distinction was clear and real and not complicated at all. The Hogwarts Express on the 1st of June was the same traveling party it always was, the same compartment, the same ritual distribution of Bertie Bott's beans from Ron's bag, the same Crookshanks determinedly attempting to occupy Hermione's entire lap while she tried to read. The difference was in the quality of the silence, the comfortable kind, the one that had weight and warmth in it, that had been earned through a year of things that mattered. Ginny sat with them. She'd appeared at the compartment door with a small bag and the slightly defensive expression of someone who hadn't been certain of their welcome, and Ron had moved along the seat without a word and she'd sat down, and that had been that. It was the right thing and it happened naturally, the way right things sometimes do. She'd asked Harry, about an hour from London, in a quiet moment when Ron and Hermione were asleep, whether she was going to be all right. Yes, Harry said. He didn't add qualifications or timelines or careful medical caveats. Just yes, flat and certain. How do you know? She said. Because whatever it did to you, it's gone, he said. It's destroyed. It can't reach you anymore. He looked at her directly. And you're stronger than you know, because you were being controlled for months and you're sitting on a train talking about it instead of broken. That's not nothing. She looked out the window for a moment. It felt like a friend, she said. When I wrote to it. It always knew exactly what to say. I know, Harry said. That was its design. That's the part that makes me feel stupid. It was designed by one of the most intelligent dark wizards who ever lived, Harry said. Designed specifically to find someone vulnerable and make itself necessary to them. The fact that it worked on you just means it was doing what it was built to do. He paused. It wasn't stupidity. It was a 12-year-old girl alone in a new place being offered exactly what she needed. That's not the same thing. She was quiet for a long time. Thank you, she said finally. The kind of thank you that covers several things at once. Anytime, Harry said. King's Cross was its usual wall of noise and steam and anxious parents, the Hogwarts crowd disgorging into the Muggle world with the slightly dazed energy of people crossing between very different registers of reality. Harry moved through the barrier alone. Ron's family was meeting him on the platform, Hermione's parents were waiting at the barrier, and the Dursleys were presumably somewhere in the main hall, though whether Vernon had sent a car or was here in person was a secondary concern. Vernon was here in person. Standing with Petunia near the station cafe, Dudley beside them in new trainers, all three of them wearing the expression they put on in public which was distinct from their private expressions in the specific way that people who are ashamed of something always manage a better performance for strangers. Harry crossed the hall toward them. Hermione intercepted him halfway, her parents just behind her, a pleasant-looking couple who had the quality of people who had raised an exceptional child and were proud and slightly baffled by it in equal measure. Her mother looked at Harry and said, "You must be Harry. Hermione's talked about you all summer." "All good things," Hermione said, with the precision of someone managing the narrative. "Mostly factual things," her mother corrected, with a smile that was clearly the genetic origin of one of Hermione's better expressions. Her father shook Harry's hand with the firm directness of a man who had decided to treat the wizarding world's famous 12-year-old as a normal child, which Harry found deeply refreshing. "Good year?" he asked. "Productive," Harry said. "Coming to us this summer?" Hermione said. Quiet, quick, while her parents were adjusting the trolley. "Not this summer," Harry said. "But I'm going to write properly. Not carefully." He looked at her and she understood what he meant, not the managed careful letters, but real ones. "And I'll need your help with the ministry process, when it starts." "Obviously," she said. The same word he'd used. She was swept away by her parents, turning to wave over her shoulder with the expression of someone who had plans for the summer and would be executing them systematically. Ron caught him near the barrier with the Weasley family in tow, Mrs. Weasley, who looked at Harry with an expression that was part warmth and part something private that was probably about the Ginny situation and probably was being heroically controlled, pulled him into a brief fierce hug that Harry accepted with the slightly surprised quality he always had when adults did that. "You'll come for the end of summer," Mrs. Weasley said. "Not a question." "I'll come," Harry said. "Mr. Weasley grabbed his hand and shook it with the enthusiastic sincerity of a man who genuinely loved Muggles and found every interaction with the Muggle world exciting. "Splendid year, from what I hear," he said. "Splendid. That fluke connection trick through the leaky cauldron, very clever." "Arthur," Mrs. Weasley said. "What?" "It was clever." Ron was grinning. Ginny was watching Harry with the slightly complicated expression she'd worn since the train, and when their eyes met she gave him the same small nod she'd given at breakfast, and Harry nodded back. The family moved toward the exit. Ron dropped back for a moment. "End of summer," he said. Mum means it and so do I. I know, Harry said. I'll be there. Ron went. Harry turned to face the Dursleys. Vernon had observed the farewells with the expression of a man trying to process information he hadn't been given a framework for, his gaze moving between Harry and the various people who had treated Harry with warmth and respect and ordinary human regard. His neck had the threatened red of someone who was recalibrating something. Petunia was watching him with an expression that Harry had never quite seen on her face before, something narrower than hostility, more searching. She'd had the cancelled payments. She knew something had changed, even if she didn't know what specifically. She was adding things up. Harry stopped in front of them. Good school year. Vernon managed. Excellent, Harry said pleasantly. Right. Vernon picked up his car keys from his breast pocket. Well. Shall we? I want to establish something before we go, Harry said. The hall traffic moved around them, indifferent, the ordinary Muggle world conducting itself in every direction. Not an argument. Just a clear statement. Vernon's jaw tightened. The payments you've been receiving from my family's estate have been cancelled, Harry said. They were terminated in August and they won't resume. He watched Vernon process that. That's done and it's not going to change. He looked between them, Vernon and Petunia both. What I want is a normal summer. I'll do my share of the housework, I'll stay out of the way when that's preferable, I'll be reasonable. In exchange, I'd like to be treated like a person who lives in the house rather than an inconvenience that's paid for. Vernon started to say something. The alternative, Harry said, keeping his voice exactly level, is that I write to a family who has offered to take me for the whole summer, and I go. And you explain to the neighbors where I've gone. He paused. It's a genuine choice. I'm not trying to be difficult. I think we can all have a bearable summer if we're straightforward with each other. Petunia was looking at him with the expression he'd been cataloging since July, the one that lived somewhere between the hostility and the something else, the thing she kept behind the hostility that Harry had never quite been able to name. Claude Sonnet 4.